What's up, adventurers? My name is Platinum Phoenix, and welcome to a very long episode. Throughout our journeys through the Calisteo Islands, I have been making bios for every single Vivisaur that we could find, including all gift Vivisaurs, all special forms of Vivisaurs, and all 149 base form of Vivisaurs. And this video is the culmination of all of them put together, which means I need to put a massive spoiler warning right here. There are almost immediately spoilers on things that are gotten throughout the game and bosses that are fought through the game. So if you have not played the game, seen the game, or watched my Let's Play of the game, just be warned, you will be seeing things that are not supposed to be seen before then. But if you are staying, I hope that you enjoy this video. And if you do, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to let me know that you liked it. And without further ado, let's get to the bios. Dimetro, or Dimetro, depending on how you want to say it. And before we actually get into the Vivisaurs, I want to go over these bios because it's a lot of information all at once. So, starting with stats, I'm giving you stats based on rank 20, and in the same vein, I'm giving you support effects as if they are rank 20, because if you plan to use the Vivisaur for the whole story, they will be about rank 20 by the end. But going left to right from stats, the first one is LP, or life points, which just tells you how much damage a Vivisaur can take before being defeated. Next up is strength, or attack power, which just determines how much damage a Vivisaur can do. Next up is defense, which determines how much damage they take from other Vivisaur's attacks. Next up is accuracy, which just determines if they can hit their skills or not. After that is evasion, which is basically the opposite of accuracy, which just tells you how often a Vivisaur will avoid getting hit by a skill. Evasion also determines speed, but we'll talk about that more in a little bit. And the last stat is critical hit rate, which just tells you how often a Vivisaur will crit, which does 1.5 times damage from their regular attacks. But getting back, next up, I want to talk about support effects, because they are kind of complicated in the way that they work. Basically, there are two zones a Vivisaur can be in a fossil battle. One is the attack zone, which is the front, and the other is the support zone, which is the back. If a Vivisaur is in the support zone, they give their support effect to the attack zone that they are listed for. So they can either give it to your attack zone or your opponent's attack zone. And it just tells you how they are affecting the stats of those two attack zones. And I think it's important to bring it up because, again, it's very good for your Vivisaurs to know when you want them to be in the support zone rather than the attack zone to help. And the last thing I want to go over is actually directly under the Vivisaur's name. It's their class. And as you can see, Dimetro here is a mid-range. There are 3 ranges that they can be: close range, mid-range, and long range. Close range being the most restrictive that they can be at, and mid-range being the most flexible. So with that being said, let's go over Dimetro. And like I also just said, Dimetro is a mid-range Vivisaur, meaning it is the most flexible out of all of the starters, being the only mid-range Vivisaur. It also has skills that allow it to charge up attacks to deal more damage, as well as attacking all of your opponent's Vivisaurs at once, which is amazing. It also has a skill called FP Absorb, which allows it to, whenever it is damaged by a skill that only damages it, it takes 30% of the FP that was used to cast that skill and gives it to you. Meaning that Dimetro basically allows you to get more FP faster in the early game than you are able to otherwise, simply because it's going to take most of the attacks and you're going to use it in most of the fights starting off, since it is your starter. It also has great support effects. making your enemies easy to hit and less likely to hit you by lowering both their accuracy and evasion, which are two things you very much want to do. Dimetro is also the fire type starter and is also my favorite design-wise because look at him, he is so cool. Is Lugmos, which is Dimetro's evolved form and has kind of weird things happening to it. First off, it has lower defense and crit rates than Dimetro. It also loses FP absorb, meaning when it gets hit, you're no longer gaining the extra FP from getting hit. It also trades a skill that hits all of your opponents for a 50% scare skill, which is an awful trade. And it trades strictly good support effects for mixed support effects, which boost your opponent's attack and defense while lowering their accuracy and speed, albeit they are higher negatives than positives and higher negatives than its base form. But due to losing a lot from its base form, this is actually the first Venusaur I kind of don't recommend super evolving, at least not immediately. There are several ways to get miraculous fossil rocks, as well as just digging them up, and you probably have more than one Venusaur on your team right now that can super evolve. So I would recommend prioritizing other Venusaurs first and letting Dimetro just be Dimetro because Dimetro is already so good. Aeros or Aeros. And Aeros, as Joe put it, is your attacking type Venusaur and does real good at that job, having the highest attack stat of all of the starters at 89 at rank 20. It's crazy because the highest a Venusaur can naturally have as an attack in this game is 109, meaning that Aeros is only 20 points away from that, and using a few buffs, you can very easily overcome that. Aeros also has two things to do with his life bar, which is weird for a starter to have two things to do with its life bar. But the first of it is Parting Blow, which is a skill that allows it, whenever its life points are below 10%, it gets a boost to all of its stats. Its attack and accuracy gets a 3 times boost, while its defense and speed, or evasion, gets a 1.5 times boost until it is knocked out or goes above that 10%. And speaking of going above that 10%, that's where Law of the Jungle comes in, because it allows Aeros to basically steal the life points of your other Venusaurs and give it to itself to heal, which is very good if you just need your Venusaur to last longer in battle to deal more damage, which is Aeros' whole thing. The last thing I was going to say about Aeros is, one, that it's an air type, and two, that it is probably the most straightforward of all of the starters here, mostly because if you played the first game, it's just a juiced up Spinax, which is awesome. Is Teffla. It has good stats. All of them go up, except for, like I just said, the accuracy. The biggest thing about Teffla is that Teffla is the only super evolved form that does not have support effects. Like 0. Not good, not bad. Basically the exact same as Aeros. That just means if you're going to put it in the support zone, it doesn't really belong there because it does a lot of damage and it's a close range Venusaur. So it really doesn't help you if you put it in the support zone, and it really wants to live in the attack zone. You have Toba, the water type starter. And unfortunately, Toba is the only starter I cannot flat out recommend because it is a water type. And we are given one more Venusaur later on in the game that is a water type, and it just clashes, especially in the early game, where you're fighting a lot of air types, and water types kind of get destroyed by them. So having two water types on your team kind of doesn't work very well at the beginning. But getting into Toba specifically, it is the only long-range starter, meaning it is going to more effectively live longer just because it has the highest life points of all the starters, as well as being in the back most of the time, when you're fighting a lot of close-range Venusaurs and mid-range Venusaurs that can't really effectively hit her very easily for their most effective damage. Toba also likes to play with her health bar using Sacrifice, which allows her to do basically the opposite of Aeros. And instead of stealing life points, she can give her life points to her allies to make them live longer. And in that same vein, Toba acts more as a supportive type Venusaur, mostly because of, like I just said, their Sacrifice, but also because of her support effect and the fact that she's a long-range Venusaur sitting in the back in the support zone. You almost are always getting her support effect. Toba also has auto counter as a skill, which just allows her to do a little bit of extra damage. Basically, whenever she takes a hit, if it only hits her and it does not rotate your Venusaurs, she will do 30% of the damage back to the Venusaur that hit her, which is pretty good, honestly. Is Equinas, which is the evolved form of Toba. Equinas has several things going for it, actually. It has the highest natural speed of any Venusaur, meaning if it is on your team, you are almost always going first in battle, which is just a good thing. It also trades 20% of its attack and defense support effect from when it was a Toba, putting all 40 of those percent into evasion, basically meaning when it's in your support zone, it is not helping with your attack and defense as much, but making your attack zone Venusaurs harder to hit. There is Tsintao, which is an interesting starter because, one, it is a close-range Venusaur, but it doesn't really necessarily have to sit in the attack zone all the time. And the reason for that is because of its support effects. Its support effects are so good, I would probably say it is the best support effects of every single starter here. Literally taking 20% away from every single stat of your enemy's attack zone Venusaur is insane for the beginning of the game. And, well, it wouldn't be at the beginning of the game, but it's basically amazing throughout the whole game because it will always cripple your opponent. And the other reason it can sit in the back is because it is a Link Venusaur. Basically meaning when Joe said it's a backup type, he was just saying it has the Link ability, which means whenever it is sitting in the support zone, the attack zone Venusaur that you have, whenever it attacks and hits one Venusaur, your backup Venusaur has a chance to also attack that Venusaur for free, which is awesome. It also has the highest crit rate of any of the starters, meaning that it effectively has a higher attack stat than Toba and Dimetro, just because of the crit chance. And it gets pretty close to Aeros in average amount of damage it deals. And the last thing I want to say is that it has the skill power scale, which is another thing that just lets you save on FP, because it just allows you to take your FP and your opponent's FP, jam them together, and then divide it between you two. So if you have low FP and your opponent has a lot of high FP from you just KOing one of their Venusaurs, you can even that out and even do another attack if you have another Venusaur, which is great. Is Bulgon, which is, of course, Tsинtao's evolution. And I would say this is the most interesting of the super evolvers of the starters. Let's start with the bad. It gets a massive decrease to both its defense and its crit rate, which are not great things. But it means it wants to sit in the support zone more, which is actually good because it has insane support effects. An insane support effect spread minus 99% to your opponent's defense and evasion, basically just taking out attack type Venusaurs without them even knowing what's happening. 99% of anything is just an insane amount to take away and cripples any Venusaur. I would also have to say it loses the Link ability, meaning it's no longer a backup Venusaur. But with those support effects, I don't really think it matters because it's just so good. Oh, Tricera! It's the whole reason I didn't recommend Toba. Tricera is another water type that we are just given, and in my opinion, works a lot better than Toba does. Mostly because it's a mid-range Venusaur. But Tricera is an amazing all-around Venusaur. Basically, if you want it to be an attacking type Venusaur, that's perfectly fine. It has a skill that allows it to rotate your opponent. It has Parting Blow that says whenever it is below 10%, it gets the exact same boost that Aeros got, with 300% to attack and accuracy and 150% boost to defense and speed. And its attack stat is actually pretty good for a more supportive Venusaur. And it's actually right in the middle of all the starters, which makes it very good. But if you want to use it as a supportive Venusaur in the support zone, it has a skill that allows you to raise the attack of any Venusaur, and its support effects also let you raise the attack of your attack zone. So you can make an attack zone Venusaur a real powerhouse using Tricera here. And it's pretty fun to be able to do that. It's Heracles, which is actually the evolved form of Tricera. And we actually just fought a Heracles. So let's go over what we just handled. It has lower accuracy and speed. It loses its Parting Blow ability, but it has an interesting support effect spread, increasing your attack and accuracy, but decreasing your defense and speed. Meaning, by using Heracles, you are making your attack zone Venusaur somewhat of a glass cannon. By making them hit like a truck, but making them not be able to really take or avoid any hits either, which is kind of a give and take situation. So if you are going first in a battle and using something that really likes to hit everything for a lot of damage very quickly, this is the perfect Venusaur to pair it with. Pacro! But before we actually talk about Pacro, I want to talk about the dig sites, because dig sites in this game are split up kind of arbitrarily. So I decided to add a new section to the bio, which is literally just the map of each of the dig sites. So it will be easier to figure out where you need to look if you are missing a specific Venusaur, because Venusaurs aren't always found in the entirety of a dig site. Sometimes they're only found in like one tiny corner for some reason. But with that being said, back to Pacro, who kind of shows that Venusaurs have different strengths. Specifically, Pacro is almost completely a support type. Having 3 out of 4 support, or 3 out of 4 skills completely designated to healing your team, which is kind of nice at the beginning. It is another air type, which we will see a lot of in the beginning of the game here, but having just a Venusaur that sit in the back and heal you and give you nice support effects is not always the worst thing, especially for the beginning when you are very limited on choices. But next up is Thalasso, another water type. We are just seeing air and water types at the beginning here, apparently. But Thalasso's whole thing is that it has very cheap skills that have the chance to rotate and poison your opponent. So being able to very cheaply annoy your enemies while sitting in the back due to it being a long-range Venusaur. Also, Thalasso has the FP Plus skill, which just gives you 10% or plus 10% to whatever FP recharge you have at the time. So since we have 70 FP recharge right now, just having Thalasso in your party or on your team during a battle means you will get 77 every turn instead of just 70. But after Thalasso is Menchi, and Menchi honestly is just kind of a basic long-range Venusaur. There's nothing super exciting about it, but even saying that, I want to make an emphasis here that almost every single Venusaur in this game has a niche that you can use it for. And Menchi's whole niche is that it is a long-range Venusaur that has a very high crit chance. Specifically, its 40% crit chance is very good for this early in the game. Also, Menchi has an ability called Solo Power. which means whatever it is the last Venusaur on your team, it gets a massive boost to its attack stat. It actually doubles its attack stat, which is incredible with the 40% crit chance it also gets. Also, it gets the sacrifice skill, the same as Toba had. So if you don't want it to be the last one on your team and want to heal, say, a close range Venusaur that you are using to do most of your attacking and most of your damage, you can sacrifice its health just to heal your other Venusaurs. But after Menchi, we have Goyle, which is actually the first Venusaur we're talking about besides Tricera that was in the first game. It's kind of nice that they give us a bunch of new Venusaurs to start out this game, because it would be kind of boring if they're just like, here's Spinax and Shan and Goyle, like they did in the first game again. But Goyle specifically is another air type that is a pretty great support Venusaur. Being able to just sit in the back and boost your attack and accuracy with its support effects. It also is able to spread excite and confusion to your opponents, which is just another good way to annoy your opponents if you have to use it for attacking. But like I said, it's good to just sit in the back and remove status effects from your side. And it also has the auto counter skill. So if it takes any damage, it will also deal damage back, which is always going to be nice in my eyes. But the last new Venusaur we have that we can find here is Raja, our first Earth type, if you don't count Tsintao. Raja is very much like Aeros, where it is a monstrous attack type Venusaur. Basically, it's a more straightforward close range Venusaur if you don't want to use Tsintao. It also has a massive attack stat of 86, which is, like I said, basically just the same as Aeros. And it also gets Charge, which even boosts its next attack, making it even more deadly after it hits rank 7. It also has the ability to rotate your opponents if you need to get an opponent closer to Raja in order to deal more damage. And its only real downside is that it has bad support effects. But if you are using Raja correctly, it should almost never be in the support zone to begin with. It's Giga Raja. And if it wasn't obvious enough, it evolves from Raja. It's a pretty straightforward upgrade from Raja, making it even a better attacking type Venusaur. It has mostly bad support effect, but you're not really using it in the support zone anyway. And you really just want to put it in the attack zone so it can just demolish other Venusaurs on your opponent's team. Hoplo, a new air type Venusaur. And Hoplo is basically a purely support type Venusaur with good support effects, the Quicken skill. It has FP Plus as a skill, which, since we are further in the game now and have fighter levels up, and FP Plus always gives you 10% of your FP recharge, it will currently give us 14 instead of the 7 it used to give us, which is a major upgrade. And actually can help you use more skills, especially if you're using Super Evolvers, because Super Evolvers tend to have higher FP costed skills. And the last reason it is a good support Venusaur, and mostly just a support Venusaur, is that its stats just aren't great. Its attack stat is 59, which really cannot do much. But moving on from Hoplo is Perso. And Perso's best use is as a FP stealing Venusaur. And by that, I mean it has an ability that whenever you use it to deal damage, you gain that much or you steal that much FP from your opponent, which is really good because it has the ability of stealing up to 180 FP, and you're only using 80 FP to use the skill. And since you have an attack stat, or it has an attack stat of 72, it is pretty good at dealing damage. But other than that, it has bad support effect, meaning that if you're going to use it, you're basically only using your support zone Venusaurs because it is a long-range Venusaur and will be negatively affecting your attack zone. But moving on from Perso is Elasmoth. And Elasmoth is, I feel like I said this a lot already, but is another great support Venusaur. It has amazing support effects, it has a scare and a rotate skill, and it can heal your Venusaurs from their status effects, which are all great things for a support type Venusaur to do. It also has Parting Blow if you need it to become an attacker, because its Parting Blow raises its attack and accuracy by 200% and then leaves its defense and speed normal. Meaning that once it is under 10% of its health, its attack jumps to 118, which is crazy because that's higher than any natural Venusaur in the game. And paired with like any Inflame or anything like that, it becomes an absolute monster. It can deal a ton of damage. But the last new Venusaur that can be found here at this dig site is Pendem. And Pendem is only two things really going for it, actually. It has a skill that can confuse an entire team, which is great because confusing Venusaurs is one of the best things you can do, because sometimes they just don't act. And then the other thing is it has Position Lock, and it's one of only 4 Venusaurs in this game that has Position Lock. So it's really good, especially for like the Ilium Fossil Cup, where you're on an icy field. Having a Position Lock Venusaur kind of allows you to negate that whole effect, which is very nice. But other than that, the only other thing it really has going for it is that it's a really cool turtle design, and it's one of only 2 Venusaurs in the entire series that are based off of turtles. So if you would want to use a turtle, this is one of the only ones you can use, and I think this is the more coolly designed one. Goyo! And actually, before I start talking about Goyo specifically, I want to point out that there is something new on the bios. Next to a Venusaur's name, if it has a star next to it, that means it is a rare Venusaur and it requires you to have 2 fossil chips in order to get. That is the way I decided to differentiate them, because it would be pretty impossible to tell otherwise, and I just wanted to make sure to be as clear as possible. But getting into Goyo specifically, Goyo has only one good thing going for it. That is its support effect that lower your opponent's defense. Other than that, it has no skill effects, it has low attack at 40, and it has a decent critical hit chance, but even with that critical chance, it only effectively boosts your attack by 1.5, meaning that whenever you crit, you only effectively have an attack of 60, which still isn't great. Or is Shoni. And Shoni is a great example of a support zone Venusaur. And what I mean by that is that it has high damaging skills, it has elemental boost, which allows it to do more damage to fire types. So if you're fighting a lot of fire types, this thing is great at just sitting in the back and pelting them. And it has good support effects to help boost up your attack zone Venusaur, or to help boost your team in case you don't want to just be using Shoni. But moving on from Shoni, next up is Stego. And despite its name, this Venusaur does not suck. In fact, it's actually pretty good. It has a good attack stat of 75. It has an Excite and a Poison skill to help deal even more damage. And it has Law of the Jungle to allow it to live longer to deal even more damage. It's really good at just attacking, and that's really all it needs to do. But next up is Tanstro. And I just love how this thing looks. It's like a really cool lizard. And I love lizards in basically any game that I play like this. Pokemon lizards are cool. This game lizards are cool. It's just a really cool design. But getting into Tanstro specifically, It is an amazing long-range Venusaur. It has high attack at 85, it has good support effects, and it has the ability to attack all of your opponents at once. All are amazing things. And the only real downside it has is, like Nygo, it has the Sleepy skill, which means whenever you use it, it will be asleep at the start of every single battle. So you basically have to contend with one turn where it can't fight, and then after that, it becomes a really good Venusaur. But after Tanstro is the last new Venusaur that can be found here, Proto. And I'll be honest, I used to be a non-believer of Proto. I used to think that Proto's only usefulness was to be able to be a Tricera before you get access to Tricera. But in this game, you are literally given Tricera before you can find any other Venusaur. So what's the usefulness of this thing? Well, Proto is an amazing support Venusaur. It has insane support effects, and it has Super Harden as a Proto. And even though it has bad stats, if you need it to become an attacker for any reason, say it's like the last Venusaur you have, you can just transform it into Tricera, and then it becomes a pretty good attacking Venusaur. I mean, I've shown that Tricera is just a good Venusaur on my team, and Proto is just Tricera with a few extra things that it can do before becoming a Tricera. So it's really cool. Krypto in the jungle entrance. And it is our first neutral type. And in fact, the only neutral type on this entire island right now. Because it is the only neutral type found here, and there was no neutral types found in the Treasure Lake. Krypto by itself really isn't that special. It's mostly just an attacking type Venusaur, where it mostly wants to deal as much damage as possible. But its biggest claim to fame is actually that it has a unique status. It is one of only 2 Venusaurs in this entire game that can cause the infection status. And the infection status will take 3 turns once it is inflicted. So it's the turn it's inflicted, and then 3 turns after that, the Venusaur that is inflicted with infection will be KO'd. It also cannot be cured by any of the skills that we have seen, like Pacro's skill can't cure it, or Goyle's last skill can't cure it either. So it's a very useful status, especially if you're struggling with some of the rounds of the tournament. Because a lot of the Venusaurs, or basically every Venusaur that we are going to come up against for a long while, are not immune to it. I say that because there is a certain type of Venusaur that is immune to it, but we don't see them for a while, so we'll talk about that more once we actually see those types of Venusaurs. But next up in the jungle entrance is Anomalo, an air type. And it is the first example of a curious Venusaur, which just means it has a different type of fossil rock than other Venusaurs, being a curious fossil rock. I would say that Anomalo, is a pretty good all-around Venusaur, being a long-range Venusaur with great support effects, and being able to attack all of your opponents at once thanks to one of its skills, being able to do that, and being able to heal your entire team all at once is a very useful skill to have. But due to the fact that it is a curious Venusaur, means that it will be lagging behind most of the time when it comes to rank, but I will explain more of that later. But next up, and our first Venusaur in the left of the jungle is Nigo. And Nigo, I would say, is a pretty good sleeper Venusaur. And I do mean that literally, because Nigo has an ability called Sleepy, which means it will always enter the battle asleep. Which, yeah, is a downside, but look at the stats you get as basically as a counterpoint to the Sleepy, or as an opposite of the Sleepy. 91 attack and 50% crit is crazy for a long-range Venusaur to have. It can also put your opponents to sleep, heal your statuses, and has the Link skill, which is awesome because it's a long-range Venusaur and will almost always be in the support zone to get advantage of that. So yeah, it will be asleep every single combat that it is in, but I think the upsides of it are a lot better than that downside and make up for it in a big way. But next up is Coatlus. And this is one of the first Venusaurs I could say is pretty lackluster. It has no stat over 56 at rank 20. Its support effects only lowers your opponent's evasion, which is, in my opinion, the least important stat to lower, because you would want to make it so your opponent can't hit you or deal less damage to you if you can, rather than make them easier to hit, because that it doesn't really matter most of the time. And the best thing I can say about Coatlus is that it has cheap skills that can cause enrage and can rotate your opponent, which is nice to do, but if that's the only benefit you're getting, I really can't recommend Coatlus. And next up is Nycto. And Nycto is the first Venusaur found on the jungle right, and is very similar to Coatlus with 4 big differences. The first one is that it has a 50% crit rate, which fixes the attack power, because if you are flipping a coin to crit, your attack power is basically about 1.5 times higher than it actually is. So most of the time it's going to be dealing more damage than Coatlus would. It can also steal FP from your opponents to help your team overall, even if it's not doing much. It has the FP plus skill, which will give you more FP overall as well, just by giving you an extra 10% to your FP gain. And the last difference is actually something we don't have access to, but trust me, it is a massive difference between Coatlus and Nycto, to where I can recommend Nycto when I don't recommend Coatlus at all. Is Nycto 8, which is the evolved of Nycto. And it is the only super evolved form that doesn't keep its same 4th skill. Because, like, basically every other evolved or super evolved form keeps its 4th skill. So Teffla has Law of the Jungle, so on and so forth. But Nycto Ace does not keep it. At least, not in name. It keeps it in spirit, because both of the skills in its base form and its super evolved form have the exact same effect, which is 80% rotating your opponent. So it doesn't really matter that it doesn't keep it, but it's kind of funny that they're like, oh, let's change this, but actually give it the same effect, because I like that effect. Other than that, it loses most of its crit rate from 50 to 15, which is an insane decrease. It also loses FP+, so you're not getting any extra FP once you evolve. And it becomes a much better support Venusaur because it gains much better support effect. But other than that, it's mostly negative. So it's, again, a lot of give and take for this super evolved form. Around here is Parapu, another curious Venusaur, and a water type on that. It has a lot going for it, actually, and it is a long range with great support effects, kind of like Anomalo. It has the Harden Plus skill, which makes it come in with its defense raised automatically into every combat. So basically, think of the Sleepy, except it's a good thing now. It can spread both confusion and poison to your opponent, which both of those are very good, because if you can confuse your opponent, sometimes they just won't act. And making Venusaurs not be able to act, especially Venusaurs that you're scared of, is very nice to be able to do. And it can also heal your team from their status effects, which, if you are confused or if you're poisoned or anything like that, that is really annoying you, Parapu can just sit in the back, confuse your opponents, and also just deal with those statuses all together, which is very nice. There is Stego, and I have one thing to say about Stego. This is what you were using the monster to try to get? Let's start with the good of Stego, alright? It's a pretty okay support Venusaur. And by that, I mean it has okay support effect. It can use a skill to confuse your opponent, and it can remove your own statuses or effects from your Venusaur. That's all great. Now let's move on to the bad. Stego has low defense and middling life points, which means if a stiff breeze hits it, it will die. And we saw this when fighting Todd, that it just doesn't live through a lot and can be taken out very easily. And being a support Venusaur, it needs to live longer if it's going to, support your other Venusaurs. And that's the main reason I don't like Stego. There is one big upside that Stego has on top of everything I've said already, but we don't get access to that big upside until the 3rd island. So you'll be dragging around something that is only okay and pretty middling, if I'm being honest, for a long time until we get to the 3rd island and you can get that upgrade. Is Barbaros, which is Stego's super evolution, and actually what I was alluding to in Stego's original bio, saying that it had one thing that really went in its favor, and that is Barbaros. But we don't gain access to it until here, so you're really stuck with a Stego until here. But Barbaros has lower speed and crit rate than Stego, and it loses auto counter. So why do I say it's actually a good thing for Stego? That's because of its support effect. It has a great increase to attack and defense, but it also lowers accuracy and speed. But that lowering is not as impactful because it's a lot lower of a percentage than, say, the other Venusaurs that lower those stats. So you aren't really worrying about it as much, and lowering it by 10 or 15% is not the worst amount that it could be lowered by. And giving them these support effects actually makes them a somewhat comparable support type Venusaur. Trima! And I just need to say, I am so happy that they put Trima earlier into this game, because in the first game, it was relegated into the post game, and you had to buy it, which is absurd. It made it basically useless in that game. But in this game, it is an amazing backup Venusaur. And by that, I mean it literally just has the Link skill. But it also has great support effects, basically raising every single stat of your attack zone Venusaur by at least some. And it also gets a great Golden Enrage skill, which, when a Venusaur is inflicted with Enrage, it lowers their accuracy. And with the Golden Enrage skill, it lowers it by so much that basically in this early of the game, any Venusaur that is inflicted with it is not hitting anything, which basically takes them out of the fight for at least a round or two, which is very good for a supportive Venusaur to do. Trima also gets the Inflame skill, which allows it to increase another Venusaur's attack stat, which is great when it's not doing much damage at all by itself. But there are two big downsides to Trima. First, the stats. They're not great, and it's built like a paper bag, so if it gets hit by anything of decent power, it's getting folded, and it's not like even close. And the bad thing about it is that it has Parting Blow as well, which is usually a good thing. But the reason it's a bad thing is that it increases its attack and accuracy by 150%. And then it multiplies its defense and speed by 75%. Meaning it literally gets less defensive when it is under 10% of its health, making it even easier to take out, which is not great for a supportive type Venusaur. But even with those two downsides, I still think Trima is a great Venusaur, and if you haven't tried it before, I highly recommend it. But moving on, next up is Sungari, which, look at those support effects. Minus 40 to every stat of your opponent is insane at any state of the game. But even early game, when it's not 40%, it's usually like 20% or something like that, which is still crazy because that's Tsintau's entire support effect at rank 20. So minus 20 is nothing to scoff at. But Sungari also gets amazing support skills. Basically every single skill it gets, it has a effect on. From its Enrage effect, which, like I just talked about, is great. Its Rotate effect, which just disorientates the opponent and makes them have to waste more FP. Or it's literally becoming a nuke effect. And by that, I mean it can sacrifice all of its LP in order to cause massive damage to a Venusaur, i.e. become a nuke. There are, again, two big downsides. Its stats are pretty lackluster, and it has the same parting blow that Trima has. So under 10% of its life points, it gets weaker in the defensive department. But if you're using it just to become a nuke anyway, I don't think you're really worrying about its defenses. But moving on to Brachio, which is our second neutral-type Venusaur in the entire game. And this one's actually pretty good. Being a long-range Venusaur, it has the typical long-range Venusaur stats of high LP and decent attack, but it also comes with a 100% rotate skill, which is great for disorientating your opponents and making them waste FP, like I just talked about on Sungari. And it's its first skill, meaning that as soon as you get Brachio, you get the 100% rotate skill. Other than that, it also gets a power scale skill, which allows you to equalize FP between you and your opponent, which, if you are using it correctly, should just give you more FP while basically suffocating your opponent from their FP, which is a very good thing to do. Raiden, which is the evolved form of Brachio. And this is just a strict upgrade to Brachio. All stats improve, it loses nothing, and it gains good support effects. What else could you ask for? Is Anato, or by its look, that's a Psyduck. Anato is a good attack type Venusaur with some pretty decent support skills. Its attack type attributes is that it has 65 attack stat with a 40% crit rate, which basically means that it has somewhere in the range of a mid to high 70% attack stat, just because of how often it's going to be critting. It also has semi-cheap skills, basically meaning you will always be able to use one of its skills basically every turn. And its support attributes are that it has the support skill, or not the support skill, the sacrifice skill, which allows it to give its LP in order to heal your other Venusaurs. And it has a 100% confuse skill, really leaning into its look of a Psyduck, which confuse is one of the best effects to give a opponent, because it makes them not do what their trainer wants them to do or their fighter wants them to do, which is very good for you. Basically, the only bad thing that Anato has going for it is that it has bad support effects, but realistically, if you're using it, you're not really worried about the support effects, and you would want to use it in the Jurassic formation mostly in order to get it up front so you don't have to worry about those support effects. That is Papigon, which is Anato's super evolved form, but it halves its crit rate, it gains only good support effects, even though it has bad support effects. They are the exact same bad support effects that Anato has, and it only gains the good support effects on top of that. So it's actually really good for it. And I just want to bring up its in-game description because it's very funny. Its in-game description reads, "It has been known to sting like a bee and dance like a butterfly," which is very funny for something that used to look like a duck and is very confused. Hachi, which is another good backup Vivisaurs. We've seen a lot of these, actually. It has the Link skill, allowing it to sit in the back and just do a lot of damage. It has great support effects, giving 50% to both attack and speed, which just allows you to hit harder with your attack zone Vivisaur and allow your backup Vivisaur to attack as well. And it's a mid-range Vivisaur, so it wants to sit in the support zone anyway. Other than that, it has very cheap skills, so even if you're attacking with it, you're almost spending nothing to do so. And on top of that, it also has a good attack stat and a crit rate, with 65 attack and 40% crit rate. There's very little that could go wrong with Hamachi. And next up, we have Desmo, which is another good Vivisaur to just sit in the back. It has great support effect, giving 30% to both attack and defense. It has a sleep skill, which can just incapacitate Vivisaurs by letting them not attack on their turn. It is a curious Vivisaur, so it will almost always be behind in rank, but being able to put things to sleep, it kind of evens out where it's not really that bad. The only real downside that it has is it has very low stats. No stat over 52 at rank 20 is just simply not great. But if you're using it strictly as a support type Vivisaur, it works pretty well. And next up, speaking of support types, is Krypto. Let's get the bad out of the way first. Awful stats. Very, very low stats. It also has no effects on its skills. So if you're attacking with it, you're just strictly trying to do damage, which is not great for it. It also has low powered skills on top of its low stats. So attacking with this thing is not what it's made for. What it is made for is sitting in the support zone and being a menace. Because look at those support effects. Minus 90% to attack and defense. Basically making anything that it's up against virtually not able to hurt anything, and making them as strong as a paper bag is amazing. It also has FP plus as just a upside on top of that, meaning that it sitting in the support zone is just giving you extra FP and allowing you to cripple anything that you are fighting, which are both amazing things that it can do. And I very highly recommend it because of those things. Just be warned that if you are using it, it cannot do damage. And you are strictly using it for that FP plus and the support effects. But next up is a Vivisaur that can do damage. It's Proto, which, like I just said, is a great attacking Vivisaur. It has 85 attack at rank 20. It has an enrage skill on top of that attack to make sure that your opponents just cannot hit you. And it has Law of the Jungle just to keep fueling it so it can keep on attacking your opponent. Basically all great things that an attacking type Vivisaur will want. And if you're looking for a fire type right now, it's a pretty good option. But switching up on that, the last new Vivisaur that we can find here is Yango. And Yango, my god, if you want to make something a steel wall, use Yango. And it is very fun to do so. And by that, I mean it has the skill Super Harden at rank 7, which just gives plus 50 defense to the Vivisaur that it targets. And on top of that, its support effects give plus 40 defense to that Vivisaur as well. So if we take a very basic Vivisaur like Aeros that we have, Aeros at rank 20 has 34 defense, which is pretty middling, if I'm being honest. But if we use the Super Harden on it, that 34 becomes 84 instantly, And then plus 40% on that 84 becomes about 118 defense. And to put that into perspective, the highest base defense that any Venusaur has in this game is 55. Meaning just these two things that Yengo can do makes Aeros have more than double the highest defense in the game, which is crazy. On top of that, Yengo also has a 100% golden excite skill, which just makes other Venusaurs not be able to use all of their skills or not be able to rotate, which is just another upside on top of the whole making a steel wall. Didomio, which is Yengo's evolved form. Didomio is the only super evolved form with super harden. So if you want a Venusaur that can super evolve and use super harden, this is literally your only option. But it also lowers Didomio speed and crit rate. Its support effects actually become mixed rather than just increasing defense, but it helps it make better tanks and actually puts it on par with how Ankylo can make tanks, only if you do the math, only being about 1 or 2 points off from what Ankylo can do. And it's Nippono, a neutral type backup Venusaur, meaning its linking is actually better than some other backup Venusaurs since it will never be resisted damage, which is great. It also has great support effects, a counter skill, which allows you to make your other Venusaurs have the counter ability to make them hit the opponent whenever they are hit. And it has a rotate skill to really irritate your opponent. And with all of that, I would say it's an overall pretty good support zone Venusaur that just wants to sit there and give you buff. But now starting on the crater, first up is Metri, which is a gigantic fossil rock Venusaur, meaning you will get all 4 of its bones immediately, making it a very good Venusaur to get. It is almost solely a supportive Venusaur though, and by that I mean it has defensive support effects, which are good, but are kind of outclassed by other Venusaurs. And it has great effects on its skills, being the 80% rotate and the 70% confuse. And then on top of that, if you really want to start gambling, it has a skill called Pandora's Box, which allows it to inflict random effects, which means you could literally inflict any status on any Venusaur. So I guess let's go gambling. But it also has the Parting Blow skill, which means whenever it's under 10% of its health, it gets a 200% boost to attack and accuracy, and its defense and speed remain the same. But moving on, next up is Dacurus, which technically you can find in Hot Spring Heights, but I didn't talk about it there because it's a rare fossil there, and here you can find it a lot easier. But getting into it specifically, this thing loves poison. It has a poison effect on every single one of its damaging skills, which is actually helpful for it because it has pretty low attack or middling attack. So the poison kind of makes up for it not being able to just do raw damage. On top of that, it has FP Absorb for whenever it gets hit, and it has good support effects if you want it to sit in the support zone. So this thing can really sit wherever you want it to. The T-Rex. And I love that it is here because in the first game, it's relegated to the post game, which is a crime. This thing is so awesome, and it's kind of sad that you had to come back here to get it and that nobody told you about it. But getting into T-Rex specifically, it is the embodiment of an attacker. It has the highest attack stat in the game, naturally at 99, and then with an armed fossil, that could be boosted to the highest attack stat that you can get in the game by just having fossils at 109. It's crazy how much damage this thing can do. It also can attack all of your opponents at once using its first skill, which is incredible. And it has several scare skills that make your opponents not be able to use several of their own skills. But other than that, it also has Law of the Jungle just so it can keep living. It has awful support effects, but if you are using it correctly, you shouldn't be using it in the support zone anyway. So its support effects do not matter because it lives in the attack zone. And this is the first new Venusaur since we got the miraculous fossil rock that can super evolve into the T-Rex Lord. And this thing, if the T-Rex is the embodiment of an attacker, this thing is like a nuke on steroids because it is crazy how much damage this thing can do. The T-Rex Lord has all of its stats boosted as long as you're factoring in the boost from the gold fossil. It also, on top of that, it loses its ability to hit all of the opponents at once on its first skill. And in fact, that first skill of the T-Rex Lord has no special effect. So it is just doing damage. And because of this, I would describe the T-Rex as a Venusaur that is specialized at dealing a ton of damage to a lot of Venusaurs all at once and kind of taking down a team in chunks all at the same time, while the T-Rex Lord specializes in literally just blasting a Venusaur off the face of the earth one at a time because its stats are insane and its skills just match those stats, and you can obliterate basically anything that is across from it, and it's crazy. Seismo! Seismo is a fairly basic attacking type Venusaur with a decent attack stat of 76, which isn't bad by any measure, but it's pretty middling. It's only slightly higher than Triceras, but along with that decent attack, it has high damaging skills and a 100% excite skill, all of which are really good if you're just trying to deal a lot of damage very quickly. But moving on from Seismo is Andoranch. And Andoranch is actually an amazing backup Venusaur. It has the Link skill, of course, being a backup Venusaur, but it also has good support effects and the Super Inflame skill, which if it gives it to itself, it allows it to boost up its own attack, allowing its Link to be even more effective. Or it can give it to your attack zone Venusaur, allowing it to do even more damage, which is another good thing. And Andoranch also has Parting Blow, which allows it to boost its attack and accuracy by 200% under 10% of its LP. Which is just a good thing because it allows it to become a potent attacker, and again, it just boosts up its Link whenever you get the Link ability to go off, which are just good things all around. Hopter! And Hopter can actually be found in the main area of Rainbow Canyon. And Hopter is a pretty good Venusaur, but is unfortunately crippled by two major things. But let's start with the good first. It has a pretty high attack stat with a 50% crit rate, which is great. And it also has pretty good effects on its skills. But the bad is that it has straight up bad support effects. And the really bad thing is it has a skill called Berserker, which just means whenever it is under 50% of its life points, it will stop obeying you and become disobedient. Which is very bad because if a Venusaur isn't obeying you, it's basically a dead Venusaur and brings you down to 2 out of 3 Venusaurs that you can bring to a fight, which isn't great and kind of makes it hard to recommend. But next up is Serato. which is just straight up a pretty good attacking type Venusaur. With 65 attack stat and a 40% crit rate, it's just pretty good, everything considered. It also focuses on rotating your opponent, which is very good to just irritate your opponent and make them have to waste more FP than they would otherwise in order to get their Venusaurs back to where they want their Venusaurs to be. Which, all in all, is a good strategy, especially if you don't like a certain Venusaur's support effect. But next up is Kamara. And this is the first Venusaur that can be found on the gondola here. And let me just say, if you like to gamble, this is your Venusaur. Because Kamara has a skill called Fickle Goddess, which straight up just boosts a random stat. Which is pretty fun to do, honestly. But since it's a random stat, it's pretty unreliable. And because Kamara is pretty basic otherwise as a long-range Venusaur, it's kind of hard to recommend it all in all. And I would say if you want to boost stats, just find a Venusaur that boosts the stats you want to boost instead of doing this. But next up is Tophus, which I just want to say is a very cool design. Having a snake Venusaur is just awesome. But getting into Tophus specifically, Tophus is a close-range Venusaur that likes to sit in the support zone. With good support effects, a sleep skill, and quicken, which can raise your other Venusaur's evasion just to make them harder to hit. All great things. But the thing that makes Tophus stand out is that it is one of only 2 Venusaurs in this entire game that has an instant KO skill. And we don't get access to the other one for a whole nother island. So it's going to be a while before we can actually get to the other Venusaur that can one-hit KO stuff. So if you're looking for this chance to be able to KO stuff that you may find difficult otherwise, this is a pretty good option for that. But next up is Django. And let me just say, Django is the less exciting cousin of Yango, because Django just has like decent attack with 67. It has a pretty good crit rate with 40%, so it can deal some damage like pretty effectively. But its only effects that its skills can give are poison, which honestly isn't great. But if you're using it strictly for attacking, poison can be helpful for that. And it has bad support effects to cover all of that up as well. So it's kind of a mediocre Venusaur with bad support effects. But moving on from that, we have Karchar, which is a great attacking Venusaur. With an 88 attack stat at rank 20, it can kind of just go through stuff if you let it. It also has a rotate skill like Serato, which, like I said, is just good to annoy your opponent. And it has Law of the Jungle, just to allow it to deal more damage overall by stealing some of your other Venusaur's life points. Other than that, it has bad support effects, but because it's an attacking type Venusaur, it should not be in the support zone anyway. And next up, starting with the canyon bottom, is Ankylo. And if I'm being honest, this thing might be better at making a steel wall than Yango is. Let's use Aeros, like we did with Yango, as an example. So, Aeros has 34 defense at rank 20. With Ankylo's Harden skill, it gets plus 30 on top of that. So, 34 plus 30 is 64. Then, on top of that, you multiply that by 99%, or 199%, to get the boost from its support effects, which makes it an insane 127 defense. Which, if I need to remind you, Yango can make Aeros have 118 defense, which means it beats it by 9 points, which is not like a negligent amount at those numbers. And it just makes things so incredibly difficult to defeat. And like I said, if you want a steel wall, use this. But it also has a few other things going for it, like the fact that it has a confuse skill on top of that, and it also lowers the attack and speed of your Venusaurs using its support effects. But if you're using it, you're mostly focusing on that defense anyway. Oh, next up is Galgaron, which is Ankylo's Super Evolved form. And Galgaron has lower attack speed and crit rate, but much better support effect. Its attack goes from -20 to -10, meaning you're nerfing your own Venusaurs less by super evolving, so just an increase. It also retains its ability to make steel walls, keeping the 99% increase to defense by its support effects, and keeping the hardened skill, which just makes it a really good support zone Venusaur. Giganto! And this thing has the second highest attack stat that we have seen in the entire game at 90. And that's only lower than Nygo. If I need to remind you, Nygo has to come into battle asleep every battle you take it into. And Giganto doesn't. Meaning it gets this massive attack stat with really very little downside. Its only real downside is the bad support effects, but again, it's an attacker. You're not putting it into support zone to begin with. And also, it has a rotate skill and Law of the Jungle, kind of like Karchar, so it can just keep living and keep hitting your opponents and annoying them over and over and over again, and it's great at doing so. Opteryx! And Opteryx is pretty interesting because it's a pretty unique Venusaur. It has a skill called Ancient Power, which allows it to transform into one of up to 10 different Venusaurs, which can be pretty fun to do because some of them are actually pretty powerful. Like, it can transform into Aloe and Venusaurs we haven't even seen yet, which, like I said, can be pretty fun. But the only downside is it's pretty unreliable in that transformation because you don't get to choose what you transform into. You just randomly transform and then are stuck as that Venusaur. Other than that, it has decent support effects as an Opteryx, and it can steal FP from your opponents with 2 different skills, meaning it's pretty good at actually fueling your other Venusaurs if you don't want to transform it. But other than that, it has awful skills, or awful stats. Nothing is above 50 at rank 20, meaning it's not doing damage and it's not taking hits for anything. It's really a one-trick pony, and that trick is transforming, which is unreliable. But moving on, next up is Polaro. And we've actually had Polaro for quite a while because of the giant fossil rock we got as a reward from the last round of the cup. And from our time with Polaro, we have seen several things, like the fact that it has amazing support effects. I mean, just raising your attack zone Venusaur's attack by 50% is incredible. But it also gets the Super Inflame skill, which raises the attack of any Venusaur by 40 points as well. Meaning, Polaro can make a monster out of a Venusaur. So, to show my point, I'm going to take a pretty middling attack stat of Tricera, which is 72, and show you what it turns out if you just pump everything into Tricera. So 72 plus 40 from the Super Inflame is 112, and then that multiplied by 1.5 for the 50% boost is 168. And like I said at the beginning of this Let's Play, the highest attack stat in the game naturally is 109. This is almost 60 points above that, which is crazy. But other than that, it has an Enrage skill and a Rotate skill, which are both good things for it to have if you don't really want to boost your Venusaurs with the Super Inflame. But honestly, you're going to want to boost your Venusaurs with the Super Inflame. And the last new Venusaur that can be found here is Aloe. which immediately makes Optrix's transforming into it kind of pointless. But Aloe is a very basic attack Venusaur. We literally fought it as the first Venusaur in the game, and you saw that it really didn't do anything but bite us, and that's really all it can do. It has an 88 attack stat, it has an Excite skill, which means it will make it so your opponent cannot rotate their Venusaurs, which, if you can rotate them and then make them stuck there, it's a very good strategy. And it has Law of the Jungle to make it live longer. Kind of like almost every other attacking Venusaur we've seen in the game. But other than that, it has Last Luster support effects, basically only increasing speed by 40%. But since it is an attacking type Venusaur, this is kind of an upgrade from other attacking type Venusaurs. This is also an attack type Venusaur that is a neutral type, which is pretty good if you want to go that route, because it is sitting in the front and takes less damage because it cannot be super effectively hit. This is Giga Aloe, which is actually the best of the Giga Venusaurs. There are 3 Giga Venusaurs. We talked about one already, being Giga Raja. This is the second one. And it being the best just means all of its stats increase. None of them actually decrease at all. It has mixed support effects. The plus 60 to attack is insane, but it also gets minus 30 to all of its other stats, or all of the other stats. But because it's an attack zone Venusaur, it's going to be in the attack zone. So you don't really have to worry about it. And when it is in the support zone, if you have another Venusaur that boosts accuracy, it's insane, because you just get the plus 60% attack for free if you can get plus 30 accuracy on a different Venusaur. It's crazy. Kentro, which honestly is a very middling Venusaur, unfortunately. Kentro has good support effects, although outclassed because they only raise defense, and we have several Venusaurs that can raise defense better. It has middling stats, with the highest being 65. It has a low chance confuse skill, only being a 30% chance, which is awful. It's like not good at all. And it has auto counter, which just means it's incentivized getting hit. All in all, it's not great. But the other new Venusaur that can be found here is awesome, and that is the E-Raptor. The E-Raptor is a Venusaur of effects. And by that, I mean that it has great support effects, and it has and its skills also have effects, like FP stealing on its skill. It can inflict random effects using its skills, and it's one of only 2 Venusaurs, the other one being Krypto, that has the infection status, which is probably the deadliest status in the game. And with these stats and with these support effects, I would say the E-Raptor is probably the best Venusaur to use the infection status. With Gorgo, and Gorgo is a pretty straightforward attacker. It has great attack stat of 83. It has good damaging skills, and it has a 50% scare skill, allowing it to really take away options from your opponents while it's hitting them in the face. The only downside to Gorgo is that it has bad support effects, but since it's an attack zone attacker, you don't really want it in the support zone anyway. But next up is Sopteryx, and Sopteryx is an amazing supportive Venusaur. It has a 100% gold confuse skill, meaning that it can really do some damage just by having the opponents attack themselves and their allies. And it has life charge, which allows it to heal your Venusaurs if the opponent does end up attacking you. Other than that, it has FP+, which allows you more options just because it gives you extra FP each turn. And it has good support effects, raising your attack zone Venusaur's speed by 90%, making it very easy for your attack zone Venusaur to dodge skills from your opponent. Other than that, it has abysmal stats, meaning that if it's hit, it probably dies, especially if it's anything neutral or super effective. But, like I said, you don't really have to worry about doing damage with Sopteryx because of the 100% Gold Confuse skill. But next up after Sopteryx is Zyno, and Zyno is unfortunately a pretty bad gimmick Venusaur. Like other gimmick Venusaurs in this game, it has a 100% crit rate, and that would be awesome if it didn't also have a 6 as an accuracy stat, meaning that it's going to basically not hit any of its moves. But if you really want to use Zyno, my biggest advice is that it relies very heavily on support, meaning that it really either relies on your support zone Venusaurs lowering the speed of your opponent. If you can lower the opponent's speed by 100, it basically means that you will always hit them, making the accuracy of your Zyno irrelevant. Or if you can put them to sleep, they also drop to 0 speed, also meaning that you are basically guaranteed to hit them regardless of your accuracy, which basically allows you to have a 100% crit rate Venusaur without the downside of the terrible accuracy. But like I said, it relies very heavily on support, and it basically is your entire strategy if you are going for that. But moving on from Zyno is Psychan, and Psychan is a supportive Venusaur that really likes its statuses. And by that, I mean it has great support effects for raising defense, and then it could also have Rallying Cry, which allows it to remove statuses from your other Venusaurs, your negative statuses. And then it has a 70% Confuse skill and a 50% Excite skill to really annoy your opponent, just by making them not be able to attack or not be able to rotate, and really taking options away from your opponent. But finally, the last new Venusaur that can be found in the Red Canyon is Dimorph. And Dimorph is just simply another amazing support Venusaur. It has amazing support effects that lowers every stat of your opponent's attack zone Venusaur. It has very cheap skills, and one of them is even an enrage skill. And it has Super Quicken if you want to focus on raising the speed of your other Venusaurs rather than making it so that Enrage is hitting your opponent. And with Enrage and Super Quicken, it can basically guarantee that your Venusaurs are not being hit by lowering accuracy and raising speed. It's a very good combination. But the biggest thing I think that Dimorph has going for it is that it can super evolve into Dimorph Ace. And Dimorph Ace basically keeps all of the great things from Dimorph while also getting a better attack stat, meaning that it's not solely a support Venusaur anymore and can be actually pretty devastating as a support zone attacker as well. And I like using it for that purpose overall. Like Alio, who is a decent attacking Venusaur with multiple ways of dealing damage. Like I just said, it really likes its poison, having a 50% silver poison skill and a 100% gold poison skill, which is very nice. But it also has just very good attack and very high damaging skills, which just lets it deal damage normally with the added poison on top of that. But next up is Nestar, who is a support Venusaur that can deal good damage also using poison. It has 2 different silver poison skills, which allow it to actually deal damage, even though it is support Venusaurs with that stat spread. It also has great support effects and healing chorus, which is like Life Charge, except it heals 200 LP to the entire team, which is very good as a support. But next up is Elasmo, which ironically is the only one here that does not spread poison. Elasmoth is a good support zone attacker with a decent attack stat of 72, 2 silver enrage skills, and Law of the Jungle like many other attacking Vivisaurs, just so it can live longer. Other than that, it has good support effects that give plus 20 to attack and accuracy to your attack zone Vivisaur. But it can also super evolve into Kaishin. And Kaishin has two big differences from Elasmoth. Kaishin has strictly better stats than Elasmoth, and it has higher but mixed support effects than Elasmoth. Kind of think of like how Tricera had good support effects, and then Heracles had good support effects, but Heracles also has the negative support effects. It also just has a super cool design, and if I'm being honest, if this thing was introduced in the main story, there's a very high chance that I would have used Kaishin over Harpy if I had the chance. But moving on from Kaishin, next up is Onyx. And Onyx is not a 27-foot long rock snake, but instead it is honestly a fairly basic attacker that likes some statuses. It has decent attack at 77. It has a silver excite and poison skill, which allows it to annoy your opponents by making sure that they can't rotate and do a little bit of extra damage. And it has elemental boost, which helps with a lot of fire types, which are actually going to be coming up from a certain fighter that really likes them in the post game. But moving on to the final water type found here, it's Brontoth. And Brontoth is a support Vivisaur that has just great damage dealing options. And if it wasn't obvious already, it is the 100% golden poison skill that it has, which honestly is just a good option in general. But other than that, it has good support effects and the Inflame skill, which allows it to boost up your attack zone Vivisaur or your other Vivisaur's attack even more if you don't want to rely on the poison strictly. With the Emraptor, the Emraptor is a great supportive Vivisaur with amazing support effects and Super Quicken to help boost up speed even more. And even though it has awful stats, it does have ways of actually dealing damage using its two different poison skills. But moving on from the Emraptor, next up is Churus. And Churus is a decent support zone attacker. It has decent stats, but its main thing that it has going for it is that its support effects are the best thing to pair with the gimmick Vivisaurs like Zyno, because it lowers the attack zone Vivisaurs of your opponent's speed by 99%, which is critical for those gimmick Vivisaurs to actually be effective, and is one of the best uses for Churus possible. But moving on from Churus, next up is Terra. And Terra is a decent support zone Vivisaur that is outclassed. It has an 80% golden rage skill, it has a rotate skill, which is good, and it has good support effects, but it is almost strictly worse than the B-Terra, and we've had access to the B-Terra for a couple of episodes already, and it just has lower stats than the B-Terra, it has a worse rotate skill than the B-Terra, and it has worse support effects than the B-Terra. So honestly, if you wanted to use Terra, I would honestly just recommend the B-Terra since it's the same thing, but better. But moving on from Terra, next up is Paraloth. And Paraloth is an attacker that basically doesn't mind sitting anywhere. It has a decent attack stat of 72. It has a 50% enrage skill, which allows it to make it so that your opponents have a harder time hitting you. And it has decent support effects, allowing it to sit in the support zone if you don't want to use it as an attacker. It also has payback, which basically means that you can counter some skills, making it so even if the opponent hits you while they are enraged, that they sometimes will do no damage and will sometimes just hit themselves. But the final new Venusaur that can be found in the Green Canyon is the V-Raptor. And the V-Raptor is solely focused on poisoning your opponent. It has a 50% silver poison skill and a 100% gold poison skill. And it really likes poisoning. It is basically the only way it can deal damage, but it can also use Inflame to help your other Venusaurs deal damage if you don't feel like using the poison skills. But the biggest thing that the V-Raptor has going for it is that it can super evolve into the V-Ripper, which is an awesome name, by the way. But the V-Ripper is a much more competent attacking Venusaur. It's basically a fairly strict upgrade in terms of stats from the V-Raptor, and it keeps all of the same skill effects, meaning that it keeps the Inflame and both of the poisoning skills. So while it is dealing good damage normally, it is still inflicting the poison statuses, allowing it to deal even more damage, which is very good. But on top of that, it also gains mixed support effects rather than the good support effects Raptor has, which tanks the opponent's defense, which is also very good. Starting with Pelto. And Pelto is a pretty good support zone Venusaur. It has great support effects, lowering your opponent's attack zone Venusaur's attack by 40%. And it has the Harden skill. And it can combine to make very defensive Venusaurs using those two things. Other than that, it has auto counter in case it wants to make itself really defensive so it can deal damage back once it's hit. And it also has relatively cheap Excite and Sleep skills, making it really good at annoying your opponents. But another big thing that it has going for it is that it can super evolve into Xanath. And Xanath has some trade-offs that make it less of a supportive Venusaur and much more of an active Venusaur. It gets the boosted stats that many of the other super evolvers get, and it has higher costed skills that deal more damage. So it keeps its same skill effects, but since they are higher costed now, I would say that it's harder to justify using them just for the skills or just for the statuses. But since you are still doing some good damage with them, I say that the statuses are now a bonus rather than the main objective of using them. Other than that, it has higher but mixed support effects, making it slightly worse in the support zone. But moving on from Xanath, next up is Salto, which, if I'm being honest, is just worse Pelto. It has fairly low stats other than its life points. It has the Harden skill, like Pelto, and it has a 40% Scare skill, which allows it to take away some options from your opponent, which is nice. It also has positive but bad support effects, basically raising the speed of your attack zone, but not by very much, and being the worst stat to raise from your supportive Venusaurs. It also, unlike Pelto, has no super evolver, meaning that it does not get better at any point. But moving on from Salto is Orano, and Orano is a decent all-around Venusaur. It has decent attack at 70 and a 50% confuse skill for when you want to use it as an attacker. And if you want to have it sit in the support zone, it has decent support effects as well as the payback skill, allowing you to kind of negate some damage while dealing damage to your opponent. But my favorite thing about Orano is actually its animation. Like, just look at this thing move. It's so funny that it's just like dancing. But moving on from Orano is Arceus. And Arceus is a support Venusaur that becomes an attacker in a pinch. It has great support effects. It has Super Inflame to raise the attack of your Venusaurs by a lot, actually. And it is one of only 8 Venusaurs in the game to have a Golden Sleep skill. which if you want a golden sleep skill, like I said, it's only one of 8 Venusaurs in the game to have one. But the reason I said that it can become an attacker in a pinch is because of its parting blow ability, allowing it to get 2 times to its attack and accuracy stats when it's under 10% of its health. Basically, meaning that if it super inflames itself and is under 10% of its health, its attack stat goes to 190, which is insane and one of the highest attack stats you can get in the game. But moving on from Arsith, the last new Venusaur that can be found here is Lexo. And Lexo is a support Venusaur that focuses on fairly cheap skills with status effects. And what I mean by that is that it has a 50% poison skill, it has an 80% poison skill, and it has a 60% sleep skill, as well as a hardened skill if you want to go for the more defensive route rather than the status effect route. It also has positive but not super helpful support effects, kind of like how Stego had them. It's Neo, and Neo is honestly a fairly basic attack zone Venusaur. It has only decent attack at 70, and it has Law of the Jungle, like many other attack zone Venusaurs have, and it also has 2 different Excite skills, which allow it to stop your opponents from rotating their Venusaurs. But other than that, it really has nothing else going for it. So, next up is Orno. And Orno only has one thing going for it, and that is when it is in your support zone, it can basically guarantee that your attack zone Venusaur lands their attack. And that is because it has great support effects. Other than that, it has low stats, terribly weak skills with no effect. So if you're using it as an attacker, it's not doing any damage. And it has a terrible parting blow ability that raises its attack and accuracy by 150%, while lowering its defense and speed. So all in all, it's really only there to raise your attack zone Venusaur's accuracy and nothing else. But moving on from Orno is Apato. And Apato is another really bland long-range Venusaur. There's just a lot of Venusaurs here in the White Canyon that are pretty bland. But Orano is fairly weak at only 64 attack. It has the 100% rotate skill that many other long-range Venusaurs have had, but it doesn't really have the stats to back it up. And other than that, it has the sacrifice skill, which allows it to die in order to give up its LP for your other Venusaurs, which might be its best use. But moving on, next up is the O-Raptor. And the O-Raptor is a Venusaur that focuses on stealing your opponent's FP. It has very cheap skills that steal your opponent's FP, and because those skills are less FP costed than the FP that it is stealing, it actually helps to cast or to use your other Venusaur's skills as well. And other than that, it also has Super Quicken to boost up speed and pretty decent support effects to go along with it. But it can also super evolve into the O-Raptor Fiend. And the O-Raptor Fiend is much more of an attacker than the original O-Raptor, because it has an amazing attack stat of 90 and very high damaging skills. But since its FP stealing skills don't steal as much FP as they cost anymore, I think of them more as a refund rather than a gaining of FP move. So when you are using these high damaging skills, you can think of it more like, instead of using this 400 FP cost skill, it's more like 290 or something like that. And that's a much better use of thinking about how his FP steal skills work. But other than that, it has gained absolutely awful support effects, meaning that it no longer wants to sit in the support zone, and if it does sit in the support zone, it really negatively affects your attack zone Venusaur. But moving on to the final new Venusaur that can be found in these dig sites. It is Guara. And Guara is another airborne Venusaur that loves its effects. It has an effect on every single skill it has, being a 50% gold sleep skill, which is one of only 8 Venusaurs that has. It has a 100% rotate skill, and it has the ability of going nuclear by giving up its LP in order to deal massive damage. And on top of all that, all of those skills that I just listed are very cheap to use, meaning that it can get these effects off for very little FP actually spent. It also has great support effects, having the defense and accuracy of your opponent's attack zone Venusaur, which is just great to do. I like to think of it as like a better souped up Jara. No, a long-range fire type. Chuno is honestly kind of basic after what I just said. It has an Inflame skill and it has Elemental Boost, meaning that whenever it has a type effectiveness, basically whenever it is attacking an Earth type, it deals extra damage to it on top of the super effective damage. But that also means whenever it gets hit with a Water type move, it also boosts that. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, and you kind of have to use it more sparingly due to that, or more with the knowledge of it, so you don't fall into the trap of just getting pummeled by Water types. But the next new Venusaur is Seismo, another long-range Venusaur. They have several of these here, actually, because Toba is also here. But Seismo has auto LP recovery, which means every single turn, at the start of your turn, it will recover a set amount of life points based on the percentage. Jesus Christ, I just found a wondrous fossil rock. I hate to stop the bio, but oh my god. Okay, well, getting back to Seismo and auto LP recovery, Seismo specifically recovers 5% of its life points, or its total life points every turn, which means it can live for a very long time. And also, if you like the idea of auto LP recovery, Seismo is one of only 3 Venusaurs in this entire game that gets it. So, I would say it's a pretty good option if you want that. And other than that, again, Seismo just pretty basic in the way of long-range Venusaurs. And you really only want to use it for the fact that it can just live forever, basically, if you're using it correctly. But the last new Venusaur that can be found here is Maya. And Maya fully focuses on support skills. And by that, I mean it loves to heal your Venusaurs. 3 out of its 4 skills are just healing skills. It also has pretty good support skills or support effect on top of that boosting defense. Other than that, I would just say, if you are going to use Maya, just understand that it is basically the medic of Venusaurs. But I actually was wrong. This is not the last new Venusaur, but it is the last new Venusaur of the mainland, because next up, there is a cavern here that holds Colo. And Colo is interesting because it has amazing support effect, but awful stats. So if you're going to use it, you're using it solely for its support effect. It also has an Excite skill, which is amazing for the fossil battles that take place in the cup in the fighter station here, because of the rotating that happens, and you can lock your opponent into a position that you want them in after the battlefield rotates them. So it doesn't actually require you to rotate them by yourself. But other than that, again, bad stats, nothing over 52, and you're just having to sit in the support zone for basically the whole time you have it. But next up, on the upper level now, is Gomp. And Gomp focuses on raising the defense of allies. And honestly, it doesn't do it as well as several other Vivisaurs we have talked about, but it does have the super hardening skill, our super hardened skill, and it can boost defense by 20% based on its support effect. But like I said, it's unfortunately outclassed because I would love to use a tiny elephant or a giant elephant based on how it looks on my team. But like I said, it's just outclassed and it's not very good for what it's trying to do. But, and this is a very big but, it has a skill called Position Lock, which means that it will lock your team into position, not allowing anything to rotate them. So if you are on ice, ice cannot rotate you. If their opponent hits you with a rotate skill, that cannot rotate you. You are just stuck in position and it just stops everything. But with that being said, our last new Vivisaur for real this time is Electro. And honestly, it's a pretty basic close range Vivisaur. It likes to attack with high attack power or high attack stat. It has a 100% poison skill, which is pretty nice, so it can just deal extra damage. And it has an auto counter skill for whenever it's punched in the face by other Vivisaurs. Milo. And apparently my favorite phrase today is that it's another great support Vivisaur. It's crazy how many of these that we have gotten access to today. But it has amazing support effects, and it also has the FP plus skill, meaning that it just sitting in the back benefits you greatly. And it's one that I would be able to recommend even if it didn't have the FP plus ability, because those support effects are really amazing. With Metria. Metria is a close range attacker that primarily likes to attack and heal its own status effects. And what I mean by that is that it is a close range Vivisaur that has a pretty good attack stat of 72, but it also, instead of having any boosting moves like Inflame or Charge that a lot of other attack zone Vivisaurs have, or having a skill like Law of the Jungle that heals itself of its own LP, it has Rallying Cry that allows it to heal its status effects, which is actually pretty nice for if it's like enraged or something like that, which makes it harder for it to actually land its attack. But moving on from Metria, next up is Aino. And Aino, unfortunately, is a pretty middling Vivisaur. It is not very good in the stats department, having no stats that are like really high. It only has a decent rotate skill, and it has Rallying Cry rather than a boosting skill like a lot of the other Triceratop-like Vivisaurs have. And it only has decent support effects. But it does have Parting Blow, and Parting Blow is actually really good on Aino, since its attack and accuracy doubles, but it only gets access to that under 10% of its life points, meaning that it only gets good when it's under 10% of its life points, which is not a good place for a Vivisaur to be. But moving on from Aino, next up is Styraco, and Styraco is just better Aino in basically every way, but unfortunately is still not amazing. It has slightly higher stats than Aino, and it has the same Parting Blow skill, meaning that its stats are actually boosted more than Aino's are because of the better stats. But that still means that it's only great under 10% of its life points, but like I said with Aino, that's not a great place to be. But it does have better support effects than Aino, since it is boosting your Vivisaur's stats rather than lowering your opponent's Vivisaur stats. And it actually has great support effects, being Enrage and Scare, which are just great things that it can spread around, making it a lot harder for your opponents to actually attack you and your Vivisaurs. But moving on from Styraco, next up is the U-Raptor. And the U-Raptor is actually probably the best Velociraptor in terms of actually dealing damage. And the reason for that is it has the highest attack of all of the Velociraptor-style Venusaurs at 68, and it has pretty good damaging skills. But the real thing that allows it to deal a lot of damage is its unique effect, being Venom from its second skill, the U-Venom. And Venom allows it to do 50% of a Venusaur's max life points, which is insane for a single status effect to do. It is only a 20% chance of activating, but a 1 in 5 chance when you're going to be doing it almost every turn if you want to try to shoot for it is not bad odds. It also has Rallying Cry, which allows it to be a pretty good support if you need it to sit in the back for any reason. But last up is Radox. And Radox is a Curious Venusaur, meaning it is going to be behind in ranks like other Curious Venusaurs we have discussed are. But it is almost an entirely support Venusaur that unfortunately does not have the skill effects to aid it in that. It has Life Charge, which allows it to heal the LP of your allies, which is very good and one of the better healing skills. And it has amazing support effects, being -30 to all of your opponent's stats. But it also has a skill that can attack all of your opponents at once randomly, but it doesn't have the attack stat to really get good use out of that, meaning that between that and the fact that it has good support effects and life charge, it feels like Radox is being pulled in two separate directions on what it wants to actually be doing, which makes it kind of hard to recommend because it's kind of spreading itself thin on what it's actually good at. Berta, another water type. And there's actually a ton of water types, as this is basically the water type home, like Mount Krakenak is the fire type home of Venusaurs. But Berta specifically is a pretty middling support Venusaur that likes to spread around status effects. And what I mean by that is that it has okay support effects, and it has Confuse and Sleep effects on some of its skills. And other than that, it has Parting Flow, which actually makes it a pretty decent attacker because it increases its attack and accuracy by 200% once it's under 10% of its life points. But moving on from Berta is Futabi. Futabi is a decent mid-range Venusaur, having 2 Excite skills, the Power Scale skill, which is basically an FP Steel skill if you use it correctly, and it has good support effects. But the biggest downside to Futabi, is that it struggles dealing damage due to its low attack stat, only having 54 attack. But a big upside to Futabi is that it can super evolve into Momo, becoming an incredible support Venusaur. And the reason it's an incredible support Venusaur is that all the skills keep their effect, meaning it keeps Power Scale and its 2 Excite skills, but its support effects become insane. It's 45% negative to all of your opponent's stats, which is crazy and really good. Also, just as a cool fun fact about Momo, it means peach in Japanese, which is probably why the Momo Venusaur is a pink Venusaur, if we're being honest. But next up after Momo is the Mammoth. And the Mammoth is interesting because it's a Venusaur that focuses on basically self-blood sacrifices. And I know how that sounds, but let me explain. The Mammoth has the sacrifice skill, allowing it to give up its own life points to its allies, which several other Venusaurs have had, and I haven't called any of them self-blood sacrifice Venusaurs. And the reason for that is that Mammoth has an interesting pair with another skill that it has, that being the Auto LP Recovery skill. And Auto LP Recovery allows it to, if it survives after it loses all of its LP, it gains a percentage of its LP back every turn. Meaning that it can sacrifice its LP again basically every turn, or it can build up its LP again to sacrifice in one big move again. And another way that it can do that is that it has an Enrage skill, basically lowering your opponent's accuracy, making it so that it is more likely to live if that opponent's Venusaur is the one attacking. So, all in all, it's actually pretty good at being a blood sacrifice. But next up is Engato. And Engato is, if I'm being real, just a pretty straight up attack type Venusaur. It has a decent attack at 70, and it has multiple poison skills to help it actually deal more damage on top of its regular damage. And it kind of supplants its damage by using the poison to enhance how much it can actually do. But after Engato is Synthos. And I love this thing because it's such a cool deer Venusaur. Engato basically has two modes when you're using it. The first mode is if it has allies still, and that is because it has the Link skill, which means it can sit in the back and just deal extra damage sometimes. And it also has good support effects, boosting up your attack Venusaurs. But if it doesn't have allies, then it actually becomes a pretty potent attacker on its own, because it has solo power, which doubles its attack power, and it has a skill that hits all of your opponents at once. So it's a pretty good come from behind Venusaur if you are only down to it. And before that, it's a really good supportive Venusaur. But moving on from Synthos, next up is Krona. And again, Krona is just another Venusaur that I love. If it's anything to go off of from my last trip in a Fossil Fighter game. But Krona's even better in this game because it got some really good buffs. It has its same high attack stat of 85, and it still has its really high damaging skills, which means it can deal a lot of damage from long range. But unlike in the first game where it had bad support effects, so it made it hard to use in the support zone, in this game, it has no support effect. So it's not negatively affecting your Venusaurs in any way, meaning that it's really good to use, even with other Venusaurs. But next up is Titanus. And Titanus is basically just a really good all-around Venusaur. It has good attack with 71, it has good support effects, and it has a rotate and a harden skill if you want it to be more of a supportive player. But after Titanus is Patchy. And again, just another Venusaur I love. And again, another Venusaur that got buffed in this game. They're just buffing all of my favorite Venusaurs. But Patchy has two insane buffs that it got. The first being that its crit raise rose from 40% to 60%, meaning that it will be critting more often than not, meaning it'll be doing more damage more often than not. And since it is a mid-range Venusaur, it's going to be sitting in the support zone a lot, and those support effects are insane. Because in the first game, it had -5 to attack, which is now -60, and in the first game, it had -10 to defense, which is now -40, which are insane buffs for almost no reason, but it just makes Patchy so much better. But next up after Patchy is Igwa, and Igwa is just a close-range Venusaur that likes to sit in the support zone. It has a Confuse skill to help make your opponents do less. It has a counter skill to make it so if your opponents do end up hitting you, that they also take damage. And it also has decent support effects. But the biggest thing about Igwa is that it can super evolve into Hibigon. And Hibi is referring to the Igwa. And Hibigon basically tanks Igwa's defense in exchange for massively increasing its support effects. Like, it's insane how good this thing's support effects are. Also, that's really the only big thing that it changes, is its support effects becoming much more of a supportive Venusaur. But other than that, don't ask me how a literal giant like kaiju iguana turns into a literal baby. But next up is the F-Raptor, which is another straightforward attacker with very few buffs. And those very few buffs are that it has the Harden skill and it has decent support effects. So unlike other attackers, it's okay sitting in the support zone. But after the F-Raptor is Mappo. And Mappo we've actually seen before on Rupert's team. And if Rupert likes it, it's probably pretty good. But Mappo specifically is an amazing attacker. It has high attack at 83. It has a silver and gold version of an enraged skill. And it has Law of Jungle like other attackers. And on top of that, it also has auto counter, so whenever it gets attacked, which it will very often due to it being a close range attacker, it will deal damage back to the Venusaur that hits it, at least percentagely. But another big thing about Mappo is that it can super evolve into the Mappo King. And the Mappo King is a pretty straightforward upgrade to Mappo. It has higher attack at 95. It keeps both of the enraged skills, meaning it can tank your opponent's accuracy. And it keeps Law of the Jungle, meaning it can stay alive for longer, using your other Venusaur's LP. The biggest downside that Mappo King has is that it has negative support effects, unlike Mappo. But since you're using Mappo King mostly as an attacker anyway, and it's a close range Venusaur, it's mostly going to be in the attack zone, meaning that you don't really have to worry about the negative support effect. And next up, after the Mappo King, is Sidon. Or Sidon, depending on how you want to say it. And it is very similar to Bronchio that we saw all the way back in Mount Brackanack, except for a few differences. One is that this has higher attack than Bronchio, and it has higher damaging skills, meaning that Sidon will be dealing more damage than Bronchio overall, but the exchange is that it has bad support effects, meaning that if it is sitting in the support zone, which it is a long-range Venusaur and will be doing for a lot of time, it will be negatively affecting your attack zone, which isn't great. But the last new Venusaur that can be found here is Mihu. And it's basically just a neutral type Tricera, meaning that no types will resist it, but it also will not be doing any super effective damage. Other than that, it has a rotate skill, it has great support effects, and it has departing blow ability, meaning that when it's under 10% of its life points, it gets a 200% buff to its attack and accuracy. And the other thing that it switches from Tricera is that it switches Tricera's amazing Inflame skill for a kind of lackluster counter skill, which isn't great. Coatlus. And I just have to point out that Fossil Fighters made a cool fire-type goldfish way before Pokemon did. And this thing is awesome. It's a good support, but honestly, it's only a supportive Venusaur, and it takes a lot of FP for you to actually get full use out of Coatlus. It has a Super Inflame skill, which costs 100 FP just to get the bonus of Super Inflame. It can inflict random effects for 230 FP. And other than that, it really only has good support effects. But moving on from Coatlus is Shelon. And Shelon is another supportive Venusaur. It has 2 scare skills. It has Super Harden. It has Position Lock, which is a really big one since there's only 4 Venusaurs that have Position Lock. And it has support effects that lowers the opponent's defense, which honestly I think is worse than buffing your own stats, but can still be helpful. But other than that, it has bad stats that make it really not capable of dealing much damage at all. And it takes a lot for it to actually deal damage. So it's mostly just a supportive Venusaur. But after Shelon is Cosmo. And Cosmo is actually a pretty good all-around Venusaur. It has a Rotate and Excite skill as a support. It has a Harden skill. And it has good support effects. And if you want to use it as an attacker, it has pretty middling attack at only 66. But it does have Parting Blow. So when it is under 10% of its health, it gets a 200% boost to its attack and accuracy, meaning it actually has 132 attack when it's under 10% of its health, which is insane. But another big boost that Cosmo has is that it can super evolve into Blitzagon. And Blitzagon turns it much more into an attacker because it trades out Parting Blow for an actually respectable attack stat of 86. And its support effects become much worse because they become mixed instead of purely good for you. But after Blitzagon is Oloro. And Oloro is an attacker that likes to be in any position on the battlefield. In the attack zone, it has good attack at 75. It has a good crit rate at 40. And it has an Enrage and a counter skill, which allows it to avoid attacks, which enrage. And if it does get hit, it allows it to hit back for some damage with the counter skill. And if it's in the SZ, it has the Link skill, meaning this is actually a backup Venusaur. And it has decent support effects, so it doesn't mind sitting in the support zone. But after Oloro is Nycto. And Nycto is another example of a super early Venusaur that you got in the first game being kind of late in this game. But to make up for it, they do something insane. They give this thing ludicrous support effects. Minus 99 to your opponent's defense is insane. And it's well worth running, even if you think Nycto is weak. But also, Nycto can deal some damage of its own. It has pretty middling attack, but it does have 2 poison skills to help it deal more damage. And it also has a Quicken skill if you want to use it purely for support. And next up is Dunkel. And Dunkel is a great support zone attacker. It has good attack at 72. It has great support effects. It has elemental boost, meaning it can do even more damage to air types. And it is the only Venusaur other than Toffus that has an instant KO skill. So if you want that on your team, or if you're having trouble with a certain Venusaur in a major fight or something, you literally can only get an instant kill KO move with Dunkel or Toffus. Those are your only 2 choices. But after Dunkel is Gondry. And Gondry is really hard to recommend, if I'm being honest. Gondry is basically Shelon, but worse, which is bad because we literally get Shelon here. It has Heart instead of Super Harden, like Shelon has. It has worse support effects than Shelon, but it does have a better scare skill, but only 1, while Shelon has 2 choices for scare skills. The only upside that Gondry actually has over Shelon is that Gondry has higher attack stat and higher damaging skills, meaning overall it will actually be dealing more damage than Shelon in the long run. But like I said, it's still kind of hard to recommend. But after Gondori is Plesio. And if I'm being honest, Plesio is kind of an outclassed mid-range attacker. It has a couple of upsides. It has 2 poison skills to help it with its pretty bad attack stat, and it has great support effects, so making it a supportive Vivisor is not a bad idea. It also has Super Quicken to help your other Vivisors evade attack if you really need them to evade attacks. But the biggest upside that Plesio actually has is that it can super evolve into Marple. And Marple is basically just a strict upgrade from Plesio. It keeps all of its skills effects, so all of the poison and super quicken, it keeps. Its attack increases to 54, which is still not great, but better than Plesio. And it increases its support effects, which is great. It has 2 major downsides, however. The first being that it has the lowest FLP of any super evolver in the game. So any super evolver that you are using or have seen or heard me talk about, this has lower life points than literally all of them in the game. And that's bad because it's also coupled with some pretty bad defense, meaning this thing gets taken out very easily from anything that looks at it funny. So it's very hard to actually use unless you're using it purely for support, which is what I recommend if you plan on using it. A Venator, which is just a great close range attacker with a good attack stat of 72, high damage skills, and the elemental boost, making it great against air types. It doesn't actually mind being in the support zone, however, because it does have good support effects, and it has the quicken skill, meaning that it's okay at being a supportive Vivisor if you don't want to use it strictly as an attacker. But next up is Amargo. And Amargo is a great long-range Vivisor. It has good support effects, it has a 40% scare skill, and it has power scale if you needed to steal your opponent's FP and give it to you. And the biggest thing Amargo has going for it is that it can super evolve into Omos. And Omos is pretty much a strict upgrade from Amargo, with better stats, actually being one of the fastest Vivisors in the game, a better scare skill with a, I believe, 10% more chance of scaring the opponent. And the only real downside that Omos has over Amargo is that it has mixed support effects rather than having the strictly good ones that Amargo has. But next up is Lagia. And Lagia is an amazing backup Vivisor. It has the Link skill, making it the backup Vivisor. It has good attack at 66, which is good for whenever it Link activates. It also has a pretty good crit rate at 30. And it has good support effects and the Inflame skill, which makes it great for sitting in the support zone. The only bad thing it has going for it is that it has a pretty lackluster Parting Blow skill, which raises its attack and accuracy by 150% when under 10% of its life points, but lowers its defense and defense and speed by 75%, meaning that it gets weaker and easier to take out, which is bad for a supportive Vivisor that wants to sit in the support zone. But next up is Guan, and this is another one that is a transforming Vivisor. And honestly, this one is pitifully weak, but it has 2 amazing upsides. The first is that it has a 90+% attack support effect for your attack zone, which is incredible. It's one of the highest that you can get for the attack for your support zone, and one of the best reasons to use it out of any reason. But the other reason to use it is that it can transform into the T-Rex, which we've had access to the T-Rex for a while, but not with the support effects of Guan, and it turns it from a complete support Vivasaur that's amazing at sitting in the support zone to one of the best attackers in the game that can just destroy teams. But next up, after Guan, is Acro. And Acro is just a straightforward attacker with good attack at 79, a 50% excite skill, and Law of the Jungle for it to live even longer. But after Acro is Diclo, and Diclo is a curious Vivasaur, meaning that it is going to be behind in rank for a while unless you put some serious time into it. But it's a pretty amazing support Vivasaur, so it doesn't actually need as much investment as you would think. It has amazing support effects, and it has one of the best healing skills in the game that heals all status effects, or all negative status effects, and heals 150 LP to every Vivasaur on your team, which is great. It also has Quicken Plus, which just allows it to have higher speed at the start of battle, meaning that you are more likely to go first at the start of battle since you're going to have higher speed at the start. But after Diclo is the S Raptor. And the S Raptor is just a good all-around Vivasaur. It's a close-range attacker, which means that it likes to sit in the attack zone, and it has a 50% rotate skill and an inflame skill, which is good for 1, irritating your opponent, and 2, buffing your teammates if you don't want it to be an attacker. And the last thing it has going for it is that it has good support effects, meaning it doesn't mind sitting in the support zone. But next up is Argento. And Argento is a fairly basic long-range Vivasaur. It has high attack at 82 and pretty good LP at 650. And it has the Harden skill and FP Absorb if it does happen to get hit. So it can raise its defense and take more attacks if it does get hit. Plus it gives you more FP if it happens to be. But the bigger thing it has is that it can Super Evolve in the Shenliu, but honestly, it is only a middling upgrade to Argento because Shenliu has only slightly higher stats. It has a new Golden Scare skill, which is pretty nice, but its support skills become mixed instead of not having any, which can be a bad thing in some circumstances. So it's just slightly harder to use than other Super Evolvers. But next up is Stiggy. And Stiggy is a decent support zone attacker. It has, frankly, a terrible attack stat at 43, but it has a pretty great crit rate at 60, effectively giving it around a 60-ish attack stat if you average everything out. But the real thing it has going for it is its incredible support effects, which makes it really good at just sitting in the back, even if you don't attack with it. But after Stiggy is Anon, and we're going from only a decent support zone attacker to one of the greatest. It has, frankly, just a decent attack stat at 66, but it has a good crit rate at 35, meaning it's critting basically 1 out of every 3 attacks. And it has the charge skill, which means if you do the math, if it crits, which it does fairly often, it goes from 66 attack stat to effectively 99, which is the highest one in the game. And if it crits after you have charged, which is, again, not the most insane thing to think about since it's a 1 in 3 chance, it goes from 99 effective attack stat to an insane 248, which is mind-blowing. It becomes one of the best attackers just by using one skill before you're attacking, and it can basically obliterate anything you are fighting against. On top of that attack stat, it also has position lock, which it is one of only 4 Vivisaurs with, meaning that it can keep you from being rotated from things like Golden Excite or from rotate skills. And it has pretty good support effects, so you want to put it in the support zone anyway. But the last new Vivisaur that can be found here is Penta. And Penta is a more straightforward attacking Vivisaur. It has good attack at 70, it has a 50% Excite skill, and it has actually a great Parting Blow skill because it raises its attack and accuracy by 300%, basically tripling those stats under 10% of its life points. And then its defense and speed are raised by 150%, which just makes it really good, especially when it is under 10% of its life points. Is Hipsy! And Hipsy is an incredible support Vivisaur. It has 2 different Confuse skill, one of them being a gold Confuse skill, which is very nice. It can heal negative status effects from your whole team using Neutralize, and it has fantastic support effects. The only real downside that Hipsy has is that it is built like a wet paper towel. It dies so unbelievably easily due to having low LP at 240 and basically no defense at 13. But those support skills that it has really make up for that lack of living. But next up is Edifo. And Edifo is an okay attacker, but it's much better in a defensive role, in my opinion. It has a 100% gold poison skill, which allows it to actually deal more damage than its stats would make you believe. It has Rallying Cry, which allows it to take away negative status effects from a target. It has good support effects, and it has FP Absorb, which means if it gets hit, you can just get more FP from it, which is very nice to allow you to do more. But the big thing that Edifo has going for it is that it can super evolve into Genius. And Genius becomes a much better attacker. It has just a strictly better attack stat, and it's the only Vivisaur in the entire game that has a skill with 2 different effects that can happen. Being its 3rd skill that allows it to have a 100% gold poison of skill, which means it will always inflict the super poison, and it has an 80% chance to rotate your opponent, which is also a very nice thing to do. The biggest downside is that it has mixed support effects, but I still think it's great because it's lowering the most important stats of your opponent while not really helping them in the long run. So, out of all the mixed support effects that we've seen so far, I think these are some of the better ones. But next up is Patrino. And Patrino is a pretty good Vivisaur in any role. In its attacker role, it has middling attack, honestly, at 67. But it does have Parting Blow that doubles that attack stat when it's under 10% of its life points. Meaning that when it's under 10% of its life points, it has an effective attack stat of 124, which is great. Or 134, actually, which is great. And it also has a Rotate and a Enrage skill, which makes it really good at just annoying your opponent. And in a supportive role, it has the Harden skill to help raise defense of some of your Vivisaurs. And it has good support effects, meaning it doesn't mind sitting in the support zone. But its biggest thing that it has going for it is that it can super evolve into Boldor. And Boldor keeps Patrino's versatility with just better stats. Its only real downside is that it has mixed support effects, kind of like Genios. But basically, it guarantees that your attack zone will hit whatever skills it's trying to use. So your attack zone will be hit by all of the opponent's attacks, but their attacks are also always going to hit. So I say that it's a pretty decent support mix. It's also one of only 2 Super Evolvers that doesn't have a counterpart, meaning that this is a wholly unique design, and it's actually a pretty cool one, in my opinion. But the next Vivisaur is Megath, and Megath is only really good at confusing your opponents, mostly because it has just an awful attack stat. It has 2 confuse skills though, and one of them is a 100% gold confuse skill. It also has a 70% counter skill, and it has okay support effect. So overall, I say it's a pretty good Vivisaur to just sit in the support zone and annoy your opponents with. But next up is Parium, and Parium is amazingly versatile. As an attacker, it has a good attack stat of 74. It has an attack that hits all of your opponents at once, so it can take that pretty good attack stat and just hit all of your opponents with it. And it has elemental boost, so if you're attacking air types, it does even more damage. Or if you're attacking water types, it does even more damage. And in its supportive role, it has the Quicken skill, which allows you to raise the speed of your Vivisaurs, and it has decent support effects. Plus, Parium is a backup Vivisaur, meaning it has the Link skill and likes to sit in the support zone anyway. But moving on from Parium is Tarbo, which is one of the most straightforward attackers in the game. It has a high attack stat at 85. It has high damaging skills on top of that high attack stat, and it has Law of the Jungle to allow it to live even longer. All very basic things for attackers, really. But next up is Jara, and Jara prioritizes effects over literally everything else. It has an effect on every single skill it has, being a Gold Sleep skill, a FP Steel skill, and a literal nuclear option where it gives up all of its life points in order for it to deal a bunch of damage. And it also has great support effect, which goes along with this whole thing of liking effects. Basically dropping your opponent's attack and speed by 50%, which is really great. But next up after Jara is Nodo. And Nodo focuses on buffing allies' defense while irritating its opponents. It has mixed support skills with plus 90 to your attack Vivisaur's defense and minus 10 to its accuracy and speed. But along with that, it also has a 70% silver confuse skill and power scale, which allows it to just steal FP if you're using it correctly. But the last new Vivisaur that can be found on this ground level of the Petrified Woods is Saros. And I just have to say, I love how Saros looks. It's such a cool, like, moose Vivisaur. And if I'm being honest, if I wasn't using Zephyr, Saros is a pretty big contender to an air type that I would have wanted to use. And it's not a bad Vivisaur either. It's an amazing support Vivisaur. It has 2 healing skills, one that heals 150 LP to your entire team, and one that can remove negative status effects from a targeted Vivisaur. Both great things for a Vivisaur to do. And on top of that, it even has good support effects. So if you're just using it for a supportive Vivisaur, that's really all you need it for, is Shan, which I just find hilarious because it's literally the only Vivisaur that cannot fly that can be found up here, and it's the only one we're going to be talking about. It is one of the worst Transformers, however. It has only okay support effects, increasing every stat by 5%. It has no effects on its skills, and it has only middling attack at 61. meaning it's not great as a Venusaur of its own. And when it transforms, it becomes Turbo, which is funny because we can literally find Turbo here in this very dig site. So if you're going to use Shanshan, you should just get Turbo. It is almost strictly better. Gato, which I talked about in the Ice Grip Plateau. It can be found here, but if you want to hear its bio, it is in the Ice Grip Plateau. It's Cryo, which is an amazing, versatile Venusaur with good attack at 70, a 100% gold, excite, and poison skill, and great support effects at 30% boost to both defense and accuracy. And if you don't find it here, you are relegated to going to the Bonehead Hollow in Treasure Lake to find it rarely. But moving on, next up is Tarata. And Tarata is a curious Venusaur, meaning it is going to be behind in rank for quite a while. But it is also a pretty awesome support Venusaur. It can heal 200% LP to your entire team. It has a 50% gold confuse skill, and it has amazing support effects. Plus 40 to your attack, and plus 20 to literally every other stat. And if you don't find it here, you are going to have to go to Hot Spring Heights to find it rarely in the cavern there. But next up is Megalo. And Megalo is another close range attacker with multiple upsides. It has good attack at 70. It has a 100% gold scare skill. It has power scale in case you need to steal back some FP from your opponent. And it has decent support effects. And if you don't find it in the said seabed cavern, you have to go to the Ice Grip Plateau and find it in the cave. And next up is Centro. And Centro is honestly a pretty bad gimmick Venusaur. It has 65 base attack and a 100% crit chance, meaning it effectively, when it hits, has a 98% or 98 attack stat, which sounds amazing if you stop there. But if you don't stop there, then you realize it only has 6 accuracy, which means it's not hitting anything. And it has Parting Blow, which actually does double its accuracy to 12, which makes it slightly better. And then it has nothing really else helping it, because there are no accuracy raising status effects. So you can't give it something like Harden or Inflame for accuracy, because that doesn't exist. And the highest support effect that you can get to raise accuracy is 99%. So if you do 299%, effectively raising the attack or the accuracy by 198%, you can get a accuracy of 36, which is not bad, but also that's lower than a ton of Venusaurs, and it requires you going full in on support for this thing, and for it being always under 10% of its life points. It's really bad. And without Parting Blow, it only has 18 accuracy, which again is just terrible. And there's nothing really else that goes with it, because you're not likely to hit, which means nothing else really matters for it. But if you really need it and you haven't found it here, then you have to go to the Dusty Dunes to find it rarely. But next up is Archeo. And Archeo is a great support Venusaur. It has Random Breath to inflict random effects. It can heal negative status effects and 150 LP for your entire team at once, which is awesome. And it has great support effects, which are plus 40 to the attack and plus 80 to accuracy. And it's found rarely somewhere else like all of the other Vivisaurs that can be found here. But since we haven't actually been to that dig site, I'm not going to be spoiling it. Archeo, being that you can find it here rarely if you don't get it in the Safe Bed Cavern. But there are also other Vivisaurs that can be found here, like Carno. Carno is a good close-range attacker that gets better when it's alone. Basically, it has good attack at 70 and solo power, which means whenever it is by itself, it doubles its attack stat, going from 70 to 140, which is insane and amazing. It also has 2 rotate skills to really irritate your opponents while you're not at 140 power, and it has Law of the Jungle, which actually synergizes with it a lot more than other attack zone Vivisaurs, because it's stealing the FP of the LP from your allies, which makes it more likely that Carno becomes the final Vivisaur standing on your team, since the enemy is likely to attack the Vivisaur they can take out, being the Vivisaur that you stole life points from. But next up is Trio, which is just another great support Vivisaur. It has amazing support effects, giving plus 40 to every stat. It also has Rallying Cry to take away any negative status effects from your Vivisaurs. And it has a 100% gold poison skill to help it deal damage even though it has awful stats. But the last new Vivisaur that can be found here is Packy. And Packy is a backup Vivisaur that specializes in keeping your attack zone Vivisaur alive. And it does this by its support effects, lowering the attack of your opponent's attack zone Vivisaurs, and through the use of Super Harden, which boosts the defense of your Vivisaurs. Which, between the two, it makes it really difficult for your opponent to actually take out your Vivisaurs, especially your attack zone Vivisaurs, which makes it just great in a supportive role. With Thalasso! Thalasso is another amazing pure support Vivisaur. It has the Quicken skill to help boost the speed of your Vivisaurs. It has the FP plus skill, which just allows you to get more FP at the start of your turn. And since we are rank 13 fighter, we get a lot of FP just from the FP plus skill. And it has a 99% minus accuracy support effect, which basically just means with this thing in your support zone, your opponents are going to have a really hard time hitting you. But next up is Delta. And unfortunately, Delta is basically just a worse version of Thalasso with a payback skill instead of Quicken, so you can counter instead of heightened speed. It still has the FP plus skill, but it has 0 support effects instead of the amazing support effects that Thalasso has. But to make up for it, it does have a 30% Confuse skill, which I would say is pretty low odds for a skill, especially just Confuse, is Bream. And Bream is actually really cool because it's basically a vampire Vivisaur. It has so many stealing skills in the form of an LP steal skill and an FP steal skill. The only downside of it is that, unlike in the first game, it has lost its poison skill, which I think is a downgrade because it doesn't really have the skills or the stats to deal a lot of damage, and the golden poison skill it used to have was really its only way of dealing a lot of damage. And the whole poison thing really went with the whole vampire thing, and I just kind of feel bad that it lost it. But next up, and actually the only other Vivisaur found in here, is Epidex. And Epidex, it just looks so cool. Like, look at this thing. But also, it is an amazing support Vivisaur that just so happened to take all of the poison skills that Bream used to have. It has a silver and a gold poison skill, making it very good at poisoning your opponents. But it also has the Quicken skill and the Link skill, which allows it to just sit in the back and deal extra damage for free. It also just has amazing support effects, making it a very good Venusaur to just sit in the support zone and spread statuses and attack for free. It's a very good backup Venusaur. Squick is our first of these chickens. There is a chicken of every single type, and Squick is the neutral one. And if anyone knows, in the first game, these are the hardest Venusaurs to get in the entire game, because you have to get every single Venusaur in the first game to their max rank in order to get the chickens, which is insane. In this game, they make it a lot easier to get them, though. So, to go over Squick by itself, Squick is an entirely supported Venusaur. It has bad stats, the highest being 43, and that's in its accuracy of all things. It has a 100% counter ability that it can give other Venusaurs, meaning that if a Venusaur hits a Venusaur that has that status, they will always hit them back. And the chickens are the only Venusaurs in the entire game that has the 100% counter skills. So it's very important to keep that in mind. And it has amazing support effects, as do all of the chickens, actually. And Squick here is actually the only chicken that has negative support effects for your opponent. But those support effects are crazy at negative 30 for every single stat of your opponent. It's one of the best negative stats that you can give your opponent. Squirk, the fire chicken. And Squirk is another pure support Venusaur, as are all the chickens. Squirk has bad stats, the highest only being 43, which is its accuracy of all things. It has a 100% counter skill, which only the chickens have, which is very good. And if I'm being honest, the best thing about Squirk is that it has probably my favorite distribution of support effects of all 5 of the chickens, having the 50% being into attack and the 30% being in defense, which is my favorite distribution of all 5 of them. Also, the 5 type chickens that are not neutral types, so the 4 chickens that have weaknesses and strengths, all of their support effects will be positive for your AZ, and all of them will have 50% to one stat, 30% to one stat, 20% to one stat, and 10% to the last stat. And they are all statted differently, which is why I said that this is my favorite, since the 2 highest percentages are to attack and then defense, which are what I value the most in support for my attack zone. Squirth, the Earth Chicken, kind of like the icon we just got. And Squirth is just another pure support Venusaur, like most of the chickens. It has bad stats, at 43 being the highest in accuracy, like all of the chickens. But Squirth actually has a 60% sleep skill, which is pretty great, and one of the better skills that the chickens get. It also has the 100% counter skill that all of the chickens have, and it has great support effects, being the best of the chickens at raising defense and making your attack zone Venusaurs live longer just because of it. And because of that, I think this is probably my second favorite of the chickens. Skyro, the air chicken. And similarly to all of the other elemental chickens, it has 2 things in common. The first being that it has a 100% counter skill, being the best in the game. And the other being that it has awful stats, with the highest being 43 in accuracy. But Skyro actually makes up for its low stats with a 90% confuse skill, which is actually pretty great, because it allows it to not have to worry about taking as many hits or dealing as much damage, since it will take Venusaurs out of commission just by confusing them. And the other thing that it has going for it is that, like many of the other elemental chickens, it has amazing support effects. However, I will say Skryro has my least favorite distribution of support effects just because it raises speed the highest, and speed is my least favorite stat to raise up all the way. Squilk, the final of the elemental chickens, and the water chicken at that. Squilk has basically the same problems as all the other chickens. It has low stats at 43, or with 43 accuracy being the highest, but it does make up for it by having an 80% poison skill, meaning that it is one of the only chickens, or one of the only elemental chickens, that can actually deal some pretty good damage, which makes it immediately more helpful than any of the other chickens. It also still has the 100% counter skill, which is amazing, and it has good support effects. I would say that because of the poison skill that it has, that Wilk is the only one of the elemental chickens that is not strictly a supportive Vivisor, because it can still do that damage using that poison skill. So, Lord Tanzilla is honestly kind of lackluster. It is a pretty decent attacking Vivisor that turns into a pure support Vivisor after the first turn. And the reason for that is because of its skill Inflame plus S, which allows it to have Super Inflame at the start of battle, actually giving it a pretty respectable attack stat for its first turn. But after that point, there's no way for it to give itself Super Inflame again, since Quiver, its Inflame counterpart, is only Inflame and not Super Inflame, so it's not as helpful. The other reason that it's not a great attacker after the first turn is because it only has one attacking skill in Dangle, which isn't even that powerful, so it's kind of hard to use as an attacker. But as a support, it's still pretty lackluster, honestly, because it only has okay support effects, and the biggest thing that it has going for it is it actually has Link, which allows it to sit in the support zone and buff your other Vivisors. And then when your attack zone Vivisors attack, it will also attack because it has the best Link skill in the entire game at 99% activation rate, which is insane and basically means every time you're attacking with your attack zone Vivisor, as long as you're only attacking one of your opponents, Link will go off, and it's pretty reliable in that case. Igneo is basically just a T-Rex Lord that you can use way before the T-Rex. It has the maximum attack of 99. It has a 100% gold scare skill. It has Roaring Fire, which is basically Super Inflame. And it has solo power, which means when it is the last Vivisor on your side of the battlefield, its attack stat doubles. And to tell you how insane that is, if you have both solo power and Super Flame or Roaring Fire equipped to your Igno, that takes it from a 99 attack stat to a 288 attack stat, which is more than literally anything else you can find for a very long time in the game. But Igno does come with two big downsides. The first is that it has horrible support effects, but that doesn't super matter because it's a close range attacker. You don't want it in the support zone anyway. But the other one is actually more of a problem, and that is that it doesn't have any other fossil rocks you can find, meaning it's basically a curious fossil rock that you get for free, and it takes it forever to rank up because of it. You get it at rank 1, getting it to rank 20 from the start of the game takes it basically the entire game, probably more, actually. By the end of the game, it'll probably be ranked 12 if you're lucky. It's just super hard to rank up and super hard to use because of it being so far behind all your other Venusaurs. But next up from Nycto is Frigi. And Frigi is easily the most potent long-range attacker in the game. It has a very respectable 88 attack stat, and it can attack both the attack zone and support zone of your opponent with its third skill. It also gets the Harden skill whenever it reaches rank 7, making it decent at support. And it also has solo power, meaning that when it is the last Venusaur left, its 88 attack goes to a monstrous 186. And mixing that with the fact that you almost certainly will have the FP to use its third skill makes it a real monster. The Frigi actually has 3 big downsides, however. 2 of them are the exact same as Nycto. It has bad support effects, which is actually bad for Frigi being a long-range Venusaur. And it has no extra fossil rocks, meaning it takes just as long for it to rank up as Nycto does. But Frigi actually has another big downside that makes it even harder to use. And that is that it requires you to have fighter level 11 to be able to have the max FP of 550 to even use Frigi's last skill. Which means until you are fighter rank 11, which doesn't happen until you are almost finished with the main story, mind you, unless you do a whole bunch of side quests, you cannot use Frigi's best skill. It's just off the table, even if it has it unlocked, which really brings it down, in my opinion. The Dinomatin. And the Dinomatin is just a battle bot made by the Dinorians. And I mean that in the most straightforward way possible. It has an 85 attack stat, which is very good. It is also just a pure high damaging Venusaur, mostly due to the fact that it only has damaging skills. It also is immune to every single stat except for Confuse, which makes it very good at just being an attacker that's hard to deal with because you can only really deal with it by either confusing it or hitting it hard. And with the right support effects, it makes hitting it hard very difficult. But moving on from the Dinomatin, next up is Duna. And Duna is a terrifying support Venusaur. Duna has 2 different Confuse skills, including a 100% gold Confuse skill, meaning she can really irritate your opponent. Duna also has Enchanting Aura, giving her a pretty good counter skill, and she has amazing support effects, boosting your attack zone Venusaur's defense and speed by 77%. Basically, Duna is the ultimate shield of a team, because she will confuse your opponent, making them not attack most of the time or attack themselves. She will put counter skills on your Venusaurs, meaning that if your opponents do attack you, there is a 70% chance they will not hit you and hit themselves. Or, if they do hit you, she gives your Venusaurs good speed and defense to just tank hits. She is basically the best shield you can ask for, and it's not really even close. But moving on from Duna is Raptin, and Raptin is almost the exact opposite of Duna. Raptin is a Dinorian that is purely focused on causing damage, with several different ways of doing it. He has decent attack at 67, he has high damaging skills to go with that decent attack, and he has 2 poison skills, meaning that while he is doing regular damage, he is also stacking poison damage on top of it. And those 2 different poison skills include a 100% gold poison skill, which does 30% of a Venusaur's maximum life point, meaning that this guy, or this Dinorian, can take out Venusaurs in like 2 to 3 hits maximum every time. It's insane, actually. He also has amazing support effects in case you didn't feel like attacking with him for some reason, boosting the attack and accuracy of your attack zone Venusaurs by 77%, the exact opposite of Duna. But last but certainly not least is King Dino himself. And Dino is the pure middle ground of his two subordinates, Duna and Raptin. And I say this because he has attacking attributes like Raptin, having high attack at 94, along with his high damaging skills. He has a 100% gold poison skill, and he has Rex Roar to boost up other Vivisaurs or himself to do even more damage. And the Duna part is his more defensive side, where he has a 100% gold excite skill, making it so that your opponents can't really choose where they are on the battlefield, making it easier for your Vivisaurs to take hits or to deal damage. And he has amazing support effects, lowering every single stat of your opponent's attack zone Vivisaur by 77%. Basically taking both of the support effects from his subordinates and flipping them to make it so your opponents are just nuked. Or Saladasaur! Or Salada. It is a Vivisaur that has what is possibly the highest potential for the maximum attack stat that you can get in the game. And no, I am not kidding. It has a 91 base attack stat, which is actually 96 because it has a gold fossil rock equipped to it. So it gets the +5 to its attack stat. It also has the charge skill, which multiplies that attack stat by 2.5, making it 240 attack stat with just charging. It also has Parting Blow, meaning when it is under 10% of its life points, it gets 3 times the attack stat. So if you charge and are in Parting Blow, it has a 720 attack stat. And then it also has a 40% crit chance, meaning that if you have all of that and you crit, which is not unlikely since it is 4 out of every 10 times that it is likely to crit, it becomes a monstrous 1080 attack stat. And that's just with Salada by itself. That's not factoring in any buffs that it can get from other Vivisaurs or any support effects that it can get. And I just thought that if we really wanted to go crazy, let's give it 2 Vivisaurs buffing it, since it is a close range Vivisaur, and have them both have +99 to the attack stat, just for fun. And if you do that, that 1080 attack becomes an absolutely insane 3,218 attack stat. That's higher than every legendary in this game, every basic Vivisaur, every super evolver. That's higher than literally most super evolvers combined. That's insane how high you can make it. It can also use that ridiculous attack stat incredibly well. It has a skill, it's actually its second skill, that allows it to randomly attack all of your opponents at the same time, which is just insane to think about. It's basically like you are given a tank, but that tank can hit every one of your opponents at the same time. It's just an amazing Vivisaur, and it sucks that it's only able to get 1 through the bonus data, and 2 at the very end of the game, because this thing would be incredible to use for an actual playthrough. The B-Rex. And actually, before I start talking about the B-Rex specifically, I want to talk about all of the Bonysaurs, because all of them are gotten at rank 20, and they all have the 100-point gold fossil rocks already equipped to them. So they're actually pretty powerful right out the gate. But other than that, they are just emulations of the original Vivisaurs. So basically, they are very similar to the Vivisaurs they are based off of, with very few differences. So, to get specific, with the B-Rex, it keeps the attack that hits both the attack zone and the support zone of your opponents, but it loses both of the scare skills, that the regular T-Rex has, which kind of sucks because why does the original have scare skills but the literal skeleton doesn't? That doesn't make sense. Other than that, it also has much lower stats than the original T-Rex. Having lower attack is especially bad for it. And it has positive support effects instead of the strictly negative support effects that the T-Rex has. So I would say that the B-Rex is basically a better support T-Rex that is less focused on doing strictly attacking. But next up is the B Bronchio. And the B Bronchio keeps the 100% rotate skill that the regular Bronchio has, which is really the big thing the regular Bronchio had, so it's actually pretty good. It also has worse stats, as I will say a lot during these bios, than the original Bronchio, and it has positive support effects, while the original had no support effects. I would say, once again, it's a better support Bronchio, which is good except when you take into account that it has lower LP and lower defense, making it a lot easier for it to be taken out. But, moving on for the B Bronchio, next up is B Tricera. And the B Tricera is actually much more closely related to Proto than to the regular Tricera. And the reason I say that is because it has really low stats, like Proto has. It has very good support effects, like Proto has. It also has Super Harden, which Proto has, while Tricera has Inflame. And then the other thing that makes me say it's like Proto is that it has a transformation skill, allowing it to transform randomly into any of the other Bonysaurs, which, I'll be honest, is kind of a letdown of a skill, because we get all of the Bonysaurs basically at the same time. So if you want to use a different Bonysaur other than B Tricera, just get that one. I mean, I would say this has one of the better support effects. So if you want to use it for the support effects and then maybe switch out if you want to do attacking, that might work. But as I said previously, a lot of these have lower stats, and it doesn't really work that well. But moving on from B Tricera, next up is B Plesio. And B Plesio keeps all of the poison skills of the regular Plesio, while having lower LP and lower defense, but having increased attack. So the B Plesio is much better at actually dealing damage than the regular Plesio. The biggest downside is that the B Plesio does not have a Super Evolver form, while the regular Plesio does. I would say, other than that, it's pretty equal to the regular Plesio because of its great support effects that are very focused instead of being spread out, and the use of the poison skills that it still gets. But next up, after the B Plesio, is B Terra. And B Terra is actually a version of a Vivisaur we haven't seen yet. So it's kind of hard to compare it to something we haven't seen, but it actually is one of the only Bonysaurs that has better stats than its original counterpart. It also has a great rotate skill and great support effects. So this is actually a Bonysaur that I highly recommend because it is a really good version of the Terra. But after B Terra is the B Jara. And B Jara is our first example, and one of the only examples, of the Bonysaurs that have switched type. While the original Jara is neutral type, the B Jara is fire type. It also keeps all of the skill effects that it has, allowing it to do several crazy things, like put your opponents to sleep with a gold sleep skill, steal FP, and inflict heavy damage, basically becoming a nuke by giving up its own LP. Other than that, it has roughly equal stats to the regular Jara, and it has great positive support effects, while the regular Jara has negative support effects for your opponent. So I would call that roughly equal as well. But moving on to the final Bonysaur, It is the B Lambio. And B Lambio, I would say, is the biggest change from the regular Vivasaur to the Bonysaur. And the reason I say that is because, one, it is the only other Bonysaur rather than the Bijara that changes type, going from a fire type to an air type. It has lost its Enrage and Excite skill from the regular Lambio. It has almost strictly worse stats than the regular Lambio. And it only has okay positive support effects rather than the negative support effects that the regular Lambio has. And honestly, I would say that this is the Bonysaur I feel is the biggest downgrade from the regular version to the Bonysaur version. Put all the Zombiesaurs together first before getting into specifics, because they all have a lot in common. Like the fact that all of them, except for Zanga Zanga, are variations on other Vivasaurs. Think the Z-Rex is the T-Rex, the Z-Tricera is the Tricera, and so on and so forth. It's very similar to how the Bonysaurs actually were. The other things they have going for them that are all the same is their amazing support effects. Again, with one exception being Zanga Zanga himself. But the one thing that all Zombiesaurs have going for them is actually that they are immune to sleep, scare, and infection. And that does include Zanga Zanga this time. But going off of all of the Zombiesaurs, I actually want to narrow it down to 3 Zombiesaurs, being the Z-Tricera, Z-Elasmo, and Z-Terra. And the reason I'm singling these 3 out is actually because they're almost interchangeable from each other. They all have almost the exact same support effects as each other, while losing all of their skill effects and their special skills, things like Parting Blow. And that's really all they have going for them. They're pure attacking Vivasaurs with really good support effects. So, going to Z-Tricera first, it has Inflame as its 4th skill, which is very nice. And it has the highest attack stat of any Tricera variant, actually, which is also a very good thing for it. And its support effects are minus 77%, like all of the Zombiesaurs. And the Tricera is missing the speed stat that it lowers, which is actually my favorite variation of the support effect of any of the Zombiesaurs, since I much prefer lowering attack, defense, and accuracy over speed. But next up is the Elasmo, and instead of Inflame, the Elasmo has Power Scale. It also has very comparable stats to the regular Elasmo, which means that it is basically as good as a regular Elasmo. The only downsides it has are that its LP are much lower than Elasmo, and it can't super evolve like Elasmo can. The Elasmo also has the really good support effects of minus 77, except it is missing accuracy instead of speed. And the last up of this trio is the Z-Terra, and the Z-Terra is honestly so bad. It is the weakest version of the Terra, and it only has Super Quicken as its 4th skill, which honestly is one of the weaker 4 skills it could have, because it only raises speed. It also probably has my least favorite of the support effects, since it also has the minus 77, except it misses defense, just making your opponents harder to take out overall. But now that we are done talking about those 3 Zombiesaurs, we can get to the 2 really good ones. Starting with the Z-Rex. And this is a T-Rex variant that is amazing in any position, which is hard to say about any other T-Rex variant. In the attack zone, it has an attack stat of 85, which is actually 90, because it has the gold fossil rock on it. It keeps its skill that attacks both the attack zone and support zone of your opponent. And it has Law of the Jungle, basically allowing it to live longer if you needed to. The other things it has going for it are in the support zone, it has the minus 77 support effects like the other zombie swords, except it is missing attack. But since it lowers accuracy by so much, your opponent's attack zone Vivisor isn't really going to be hitting you all that often, which is great because it just makes it easier for your Z-Rex to live longer. And if it doesn't live longer and is taken out early because it's a close range Vivisor, it has the Resurrect skill, which may be the single most broken skill in the game because it allows the Z-Rex, after 3 turns of being dead, to just live again. It revives itself and can just keep doing that over and over and over again if you don't lose the battle, which is an amazing skill to have for a Vivisor that focuses on longevity and damage. But the last, and certainly not least, is Zanga himself. This thing is a monster, and it perfectly embodies Zanga's character in Vivisor form. Zanga is a king that literally only cares about himself. Basically, he's very selfish and doesn't care about anything if it doesn't benefit him in some way or some form. And all of his skills represent this, or all of his attributes represent this. He has the best stats out of all of the zombie swords, literally being the only zombie sword with more than 300 LP. So he can take a hit, he can really deal out damage, and it's basically like he stole stats from the other zombie swords to make himself even stronger. He also keeps all of the skill effects for himself instead of giving them to the other zombie swords to use. So basically, he is the only zombie sword besides the Z-Rex that has skill effects that he can use and is not strictly damage based. He can do stuff like inflict random effects with no limit, which is insane to think about, by the way. He can attack both the attack zone and the support zone of your opponent, kind of like the Z-Rex. And he has Law of the Jungle, which means if he is damaged to the point where he is scared of dying, he can steal LP from his allies, or his subordinates basically, to live longer. He is also the only zombie sword with a special skill being FP Absorb. Basically, whenever he gets hit, he gets a benefit for being attacked, which again is just a great skill for him and shows how self-centered he is. He's like, oh, you hit me? Well, I guess I'm just going to gain FP from this. And the last thing that really shows how selfish he is that he literally hurts his own team if he is in the support zone, because he has support effects that lowers his own attack zone Vivisor's stats by 77% on each of the stats. Basically saying he cares about nothing unless it is him, which I think just embodies his personality to a perfect T.